They stripped her name, her voice, and her dignity, then dragged her in chains to a monster's throne, expecting her to die. What the Alpha King found instead was a mute girl whose silence made the candles bend, whose stillness cracked his own darkness wide open. She rejected him before the entire court, and when they tied her to a burning pyre as a witch, she finally stopped holding back. And what rose from her was something the world was never meant to see. If you're watching, stay with me to the very end. This one hits hard. Drop a like and tell me in the comments what city you're watching from right now. Let's begin. The snow came down sideways the morning Lyra Dane was sold. It was the kind of snow that didn't fall so much as a tack, slanted, hard, needling the skin through wool. The courtyard of House Dane had been swept 3 times since dawn, and 3 times the storm had buried the flagstones again, so the servants had given up and were now huddled against the east wall, stamping their boots and pretending not to look at the cart. The cart was a plain thing, black wood, iron wheels, a single bench inside, no cushions. It had been used for prisoners before. Everyone knew that. Nobody said it. Lyra sat on the edge of the bench with her hands folded in her lap because she had been told to fold them there. Her wrists were already bruised under the sleeves of her gown, not from chains, not yet, just from her sister Morel's fingers the night before, when Morel had grabbed her by the arm and hissed, "Don't you dare cry in front of Father. Don't you dare embarrass us one last time." She hadn't cried. She hadn't done anything. That was the problem. That had always been the problem. The gown they had put on her was white. White, in a frontier kingdom where white meant offering, white meant sacrifice, white meant here. Take her. She's yours now. Don't send her back. The fabric was too thin for the weather. By the time the cart rolled out of the gate, Lyra's lips had gone the color of old bone, and her fingers had stopped feeling like fingers. She didn't shiver. She had trained herself out of shivering a long time ago. Shivering was a sound, sort of a movement, a thing that drew the eye. And in House Dane, drawing the eye was the worst thing a girl like her could do. A girl like her. The words followed her everywhere, in the mouths of the kitchen women, in the whispers of her cousins, in her own father's voice, the one time she had heard him speak her name out loud, and he had spat it like it had bones in it. A girl like her. Born wrong, born broken, born a stain on the bloodline, mute, omega, in a house that worshipped teeth. 3 weeks earlier, on the night the summons came from the Black Fortress, Lord Corwin Dane had stood in front of the great hearth in the feast hall and read the parchment aloud to his household. His voice had cracked once, not with grief, not with fear, with something closer to triumph, as if he'd just been handed the solution to a long arithmetic problem. The Alpha King requires a bride of offering, he had read, one unmarried daughter of standing from each of the border houses, to be delivered to the fortress before the winter moons. There had been silence. Then Morel, golden, perfect, 19-year-old Morel, the pride of the house, the one with suitors lined up from 3 kingdoms over, had made a small sound in her throat. Not quite a word, just a noise. Lord Corwin had looked at her, then, slowly, across the table, at Lyra. Lyra had been sitting with her soup spoon halfway to her mouth. She had set it down very carefully, the way she did everything, because everything she did was watched. Her, Lord Corwin had said. Morel had begun to cry then, very prettily, the way she cried at weddings and funerals. "Father, are you sure she's not? She doesn't even—" "She's unmarried," Lord Corwin had said flatly. "She's of this house. She satisfies the summons." "She's a flaw," Morel had whispered. "Yes," Lord Corwin had said, "and now she'll be a useful one." He had not looked at Lyra when he said it. He had been looking at the fire. He had smiled at the fire, a slow, tight smile. The smile of a man who had just figured out how to pay a debt with a coin he'd been trying to throw away for 19 years. Lyra had finished her soup. She had finished it because she had been taught that it was rude to waste food, and whatever else she was not rude. The soup had tasted of nothing. It had tasted of the rest of her life. Lady Dane came to her rooms that night. Her mother had never been a cruel woman, not exactly. She was simply a woman who had decided very early on that love was a kind of currency you did not spend on daughters who could not help you. She had spent it on Morel. She had spent it on Lyra's older brother Tavin, the alpha heir, all shoulders and jaw and laughter. By the time Lyra was born, small, blue-lipped, already making no sound at all, the coffers had been empty for a long time. She stood in the doorway of Lyra's narrow bedroom and looked at her daughter the way you look at a piece of furniture you're about to move out of the house. "You understand what's being asked of you," she said. Lyra nodded because nodding was what her mother wanted. "The Alpha King is not like other men. They say he has killed 3 wives. They say he broke a general's spine with one hand for speaking out of turn." Lyra nodded again. "You won't last a week." Lyra looked at her. Her mother's mouth twitched. Just once. Something moved behind her face that might have been regret. If regret had been allowed to live in that house, it died quickly. "It's better this way," Lady Dane said. "For the family, you understand?" She crossed the room. She laid a hand on top of Lyra's head. Not a caress exactly, more the way you pat a dog you're about to leave behind. And then she walked out. The door closed. The latch clicked. Lyra sat on the edge of her bed with her hands folded in her lap. Because her hands had been folded in her lap for so long she didn't know where else to put them anymore. She did not cry. But inside her chest, very far down, in a place she had spent 19 years learning how to keep locked, something stirred. She pressed her palm flat against her sternum, and she thought, very clearly, very deliberately, "No. Not yet. Not here. Not for them." And the thing inside her went still. The cart jolted over the first of the mountain passes 2 days out of the Dain estate. There were 4 guards riding escort, all of them alphas, all of them bored. They didn't speak to her. They had been told not to. She was cargo, and you don't chat with cargo. At the inns where they stopped, she was given a room with a lock on the outside and a tray shoved under the door twice a day. She ate what she could. She slept when sleep came. She watched the ceiling and counted the cracks in the wood and did not let herself think about the Black Fortress, or the king, or the 4 other girls who had already gone to him, or what was left of them. On the 4th night, at an inn in a village whose name she never learned, she heard the guards talking in the common room below her window. "Lord Varick's girl last year," one of them was saying, a low voice, gravelly. "Pretty little thing, blonde. Remember her?" "I remember." "They sent her back in a box, sealed, wouldn't let the family open it." A pause. A throat clearing. "This one'll be worse. She can't even scream." A laugh, short, ugly. "That's a mercy in it. Save his ears." Upstairs, Lyra lay very still on the narrow bed. The straw mattress smelled of other people's sweat. Outside, the wind screamed against the shutters, and below her, men who would deliver her to her death drank mulled wine and laughed about it. She pressed her hand to her chest again. And again, she thought, not yet. They reached the Black Fortress on the 7th morning. Lyra had heard stories of it all her life. Every child in the border kingdoms heard those stories. The fortress of King Adric Vale, carved into the side of a mountain so dark the locals called it the Bruise. A place where no tree grew and no bird sang. A fortress of black stone and black iron, ringed by a curtain wall 3 men thick, with gates that had never been breached. The throne of a king who had taken power at 18 by killing his own father across a war table, and who had spent the 11 years since then drowning every rebellion, every border skirmish, every whispered treason in so much blood that the frontier kingdoms had learned to whisper his name the way small animals learn not to move when the hawk's shadow crosses them. The stories were all true. They were also, Lyra realized as the cart rattled through the outer gate, not quite enough. The fortress was not dark because the stone was dark. The fortress was dark because it ate light. Torches burned along the walls, and the flames looked small and sheepish, as if they knew they shouldn't be there. The air smelled of iron and wood smoke, and something underneath both of those, something colder, older, the smell of a place that had seen a great deal of dying and had not gotten tired of it yet. The cart stopped in the inner courtyard. A man in black livery opened the door and extended a gloved hand. "My lady." She didn't take the hand. She climbed out on her own because her legs were shaking and she needed them to know she was still in charge of them. The courtyard was full of people. Not a crowd, exactly. A gathering. Soldiers along the walls. A dozen men in the colors of the great houses of the realm, standing in a loose half-circle near the hall doors, their breath steaming in the cold. Servants along the edges, heads down. And at the center of everything, 4 other girls. 4 of them, each in white, each shivering, each from a border house. Lyra recognized the Varric crest on one, the Morel on another, the Thornwick, the Osri. Daughters of houses that had, like hers, been ordered to produce an offering. They looked at her as she was led forward. One of them, the Thornwick girl, tall, red-haired, beautiful in the sharp way a knife is beautiful, looked at her and actually laughed. A short, involuntary laugh. Not cruel, just surprised. As if she had been expecting competition and had been handed a joke instead. Lyra had been seen like that her whole life. She had a system for it. She let her eyes go flat and her shoulders stay still, and she pretended she was somewhere else, somewhere high up, watching it happen to another girl. The hall doors opened, and the Alpha King came out. She had expected a monster. Everyone had told her to expect a monster. Her mother, the guards, the stories. Even the snow seemed to have told her. So when she saw him, the first thing she felt underneath the fear was confusion, because he was not a monster, not in the way she had been taught to picture monsters. He was tall. That was the first thing. Not unreasonably tall. There were taller men in the courtyard, but he was built tall, the way a tower is built tall. Every part of him meant for weight and cold and staying upright through storms. Black hair, cropped short, a beard close to the jaw, a face that would have been handsome if it had ever bothered to be handsome. Strong nose, heavy brow, a mouth that had clearly not smiled in a long time and had forgotten the shape of it. He wore black. Of course he wore black. Plain black wool, a black cloak, no crown, no jewels, because a man like that did not need jewels to be recognized. You knew who he was the moment he walked into a space. The space itself told you, but it was the eyes that stopped her. His eyes were gray, pale gray, almost silver, the color of ice over deep water. And when those eyes swept across the courtyard, across the line of trembling girls, across the watching nobles, the temperature in the yard seemed to drop another 10 degrees. Soldiers stiffened. Nobles coughed. One of the girls, Morel, made a small mewling sound and had to grip the Varric girl's arm to stay upright. Lyra did not move. Not because she was brave. She didn't feel brave. She felt like a stone sinking very slowly through very cold water. She didn't move because moving had never been a thing she did in moments like this. Moving drew the eye. Stillness was armor. Stillness was the only thing she owned. The king walked the line. He stopped in front of the Varric girl first, looked at her. She trembled. He moved on. Morel. A longer look. Morel's knees buckled, and the Varric girl caught her, and the king turned away without comment. Osre. A glance. Thornwick, the red-haired one, who lifted her chin and tried to look at him directly. He looked back, once, hard, and her eyes fell and her face went white, and she did not try that again. Then he stopped in front of Lyra. Shum. There was a rule in the border houses, an old rule, whispered, never written, about how one behaved in the presence of a king. You lowered your eyes. You did not speak unless spoken to. If he looked at you, you did not look back. Lyra had been taught the rule. Her mother had drilled it into her. Her father had beaten her brother bloody for violating it once, when Tavian was 12. She knew the rule. She believed in the rule. She looked up at him anyway. She did not know why. Later, when she tried to remember the moment, she would not be able to explain it. Something about the cold. Something about the way the thing in her chest had woken up the moment he stepped into the courtyard and was now humming, low and steady, like a string that had just been plucked. Something about being 19 years old and having spent every one of those years with her eyes down and finding suddenly that she had reached the end of the reasons to keep them down. She looked up. His eyes were right there. They didn't widen. They didn't narrow. They simply stopped. The sweep of his attention had been moving, and now it was not. It was fixed. On her. Gray on gray. The silver of ice over the gray of smoke. And for a long second, 2 seconds, 3. The Alpha King of the frontier did not move, did not breathe, did not do anything at all except look at the mute Omega girl from House Dawn who had broken the rule. Someone in the crowd of nobles cleared his throat. A nervous sound. The king did not turn. Name, he said, low, quiet, not loud enough to carry. Behind Lyra, the Dain steward, the man who had ridden the whole week with her and had not spoken a single word to her, stepped forward and said, Lyra Dain, your grace, daughter of Lord Corwin Dane, unmarried, 19 years. A pause. The steward's voice caught just slightly. She does not speak, your grace. Does not, the king repeated. Or cannot. Cannot, your grace. Since birth. Something moved across the king's face. Not pity. Not interest, exactly. Something harder to name. His jaw tightened. He looked at Lyra again, longer this time. She's looking at me, he said, soft, almost to himself. Your grace, the steward began. Be quiet. The steward was quiet. The king bent down. Not far. She was not short, and he was not stooping to her, but enough to bring his face closer to hers, close enough that she could see the faint scar that ran from the corner of his left eye into his hairline, close enough that she could smell him, leather, iron, the cold outside smell of a man who did not stay indoors, and close enough that the thing in her chest gave one long, low pull, like a tide being called home. She locked it down. She locked it down so hard her vision went briefly gray at the edges. The king's nostrils flared, just once, almost imperceptibly, like a wolf catching a scent on the wind and not being sure what to make of it. Huh, he said. He straightened. He turned to the nobles. This one, he said. The courtyard erupted, not in sound, no one dared, but in a wave of shifted weight and sharp breath and exchanged glances that Lyra could feel even with her eyes fixed forward. The Thornwick girl's mouth had fallen open. The Morel girl had started weeping quietly. The Dane steward behind her had gone absolutely rigid because he had been sent with instructions that did not include this, that had accounted for her rejection and not her selection. And now he was standing in a courtyard with a king who had just chosen the broken daughter over the whole girls, and he had no idea what to do. A man stepped forward from the cluster of nobles, older, gray-bearded, heavy with furs and authority. Lyra knew him by sight. Lord Wren Halleck, warden of the Western Marches, one of the king's closest advisors, a man whose name had come up in her father's war rooms the way storms came up in a sailor's talk. Your Grace. Halleck's voice was careful. Careful was a word that men used around King Adric Vale the way they used careful around unexploded siege powder. Forgive me, the Dain girl. There are concerns. Speak them. Halleck hesitated. She is mute, your grace. A bride who cannot speak her vows. Cannot bear a verbal oath. The scholars will call the binding void. The other houses will say you were shown disrespect. That Dain sent a flawed offering. There will be noise. Your grace. Noise, the king repeated. Yes, your grace. The king looked at him. Just looked at him. Halleck did not quite take a step back, but something in his posture did. Lord Halleck, the king said, tell me, in the 11 years I have held this throne, have you ever known me to concern myself with noise? No, your grace. No. But... Halleck closed his mouth. The king turned, slowly, and addressed the entire courtyard, and when he raised his voice it was not loud, but it carried. It carried the way a blade carries, edge first, to the bone. The Dain girl stays. The others return to their houses with my thanks and a token from my treasury, because they have ridden a long way in bad weather, and I am not, contrary to several rumors, entirely without manners. A nervous laugh from somewhere in the crowd, cut short. She will be lodged in the East Tower. She will be given servants and clothing and such comforts as befit a guest of this house. I will speak with her. After I have spoken with her, I will decide. Until then, and now his eyes came back to Lyra, and they were cold and bright and unreadable. She is mine. No hand touches her. No voice disrespects her. The man who forgets this will find out what I am remembered for. Silence. Am I understood? A chorus of yes, your grace, ragged, fervent. The king walked back into the hall without another word. The black cloak moved behind him like water. The doors closed. and Lyra Dane, standing in a courtyard full of men who had just watched the Alpha King of the frontier claim her without touching her, felt the thing in her chest give one more pull, and then go, obediently, back to sleep. For now. So, they put her in a tower room. It was a large room, much larger than her bedroom at home. A four-poster bed with real curtains. A fireplace that actually drew. A window with glass in it. Real glass. Not the greased parchment she had grown up with. Looking out across the black expanse of the fortress walls and the white waste of the mountains beyond. A wardrobe. A washstand. A chair by the fire, with a fur thrown over it, the fur still smelling faintly of the animal. A serving woman came in. Older, broad-faced, sharp-eyed. She did not curtsy. She did not smile. "Name's Oda," she said. "I'm to look after you. Dress you, feed you, brush your hair. You don't talk. I've been told. Suits me fine. I don't like chatter." She set down a tray, bread, cheese, a small roast bird, a clay cup of something hot and dark that smelled of herbs. "Eat. You look like a stick. He'll want you warm when he calls for you." Lyra did not ask when that would be. She couldn't have if she'd wanted to. Oda answered anyway. "Tonight, probably. Maybe tomorrow. Depends on how many idiots are waiting in his audience chamber. There's always idiots. They multiply." Oda moved through the room, building up the fire, pulling curtains. She stopped by the bed and looked back at Lyra, who was still standing by the door because she had not been told where to sit. "Child, sit down. You're not a prisoner. Not yet, anyway." Lyra sat in the chair by the fire. The fur was warm. Her hands, when she put them out toward the flame, looked like someone else's hands. Thin, blue-nailed, trembling. Oda watched her. Something in the older woman's face shifted, not softened. Oda did not look like a woman who softened, but shifted. "He won't hurt you," Oda said. Gruff. "Tonight, I mean. That's not how he does it. He talks first. That's the bit everyone forgets about him. He talks first, and he watches. And then, if he decides he doesn't like what he's watching, then he hurts you." She paused. "So, give him something to like." She left. The door closed behind her. There was no lock clicking. That was somehow worse. Lyra sat by the fire for a long time. The light went out of the window. The wind got louder. Somewhere below, a bell rang. Twice. Then 3 times. A pattern she didn't recognize. Footsteps in the corridor, passing her door, not stopping. A shout, distant, cut off. The normal sounds of a fortress at evening. Inside her chest, the thing stirred. She pressed her palm against her sternum the way she always did. The old gesture. The containment. Not yet. But the thing didn't go quiet this time. It rolled, slow, restless, like a sleeper turning over, because he had seen it. She knew that now. She had known it the moment his nostrils flared in the courtyard, the moment his head had tipped that quarter-inch sideways. The Alpha King had not chosen her because she was Omega, or because she was mute, or because she was unclaimable. He had chosen her because something inside him had recognized something inside her, the way one bell across a valley answers another. That was not good. That was in fact the worst possible thing, because Lyra knew what was inside her. She had known since she was 7 years old when she had first felt it wake up. In the middle of the night, for no reason, a pressure behind her ribs like a fist closing, and every candle in her room had bent sideways toward her bed as if they were bowing. She had been alone. No one had seen. She had held it down, and held it down, and held it down until it had gone away. And in the morning, all the candles had been upright again, and she had not told a soul. Not then, not ever. She had spent 12 years learning how to hold it down. She had made her whole self into a cage. Her silence, her stillness, the flat inward look of her. All of it, architecture, every piece of her designed to keep the thing inside her asleep. Because she had understood, even at 7, something very simple and very terrible. What was inside her was not a gift. It was not a blessing. It was not something that could be used. It was something that, if let out, would not stop. And now she had been brought to a fortress full of the most dangerous men in the frontier and put in front of a king whose own violence rang in the air around him like a struck bronze. And that king had looked at her, and the thing inside her had answered him. She curled forward in the chair. She pressed both hands to her chest now. She closed her eyes. Not here, she thought. Not him. Not for this. The thing inside her settled. Reluctantly, she opened her eyes. The fire had burned low. She stood on legs that had decided, somewhere in the last hour, to be legs again, and she walked to the window and put her forehead against the cold glass and looked out at the black mountains. Somewhere out there, her father was sitting in his hall drinking wine, telling his bannermen that the Dain problem had been solved. Her mother was at her sewing. Morel was probably already being measured for a new gown, because there was a Morel heir she had had her eye on, and now with the Omega embarrassment out of the house, certain doors would open. None of them were thinking about her. None of them would ever think about her again unless the box came back. Lyra closed her eyes against the glass, and a voice, quiet, male, right behind her, said, "You don't flinch, Masid." She spun. She had not heard the door. She had not heard a footstep. He was simply there, leaning against the frame of her door, one shoulder to the wood, arms folded, watching her. He had changed out of the heavy cloak. Just a black shirt now, sleeves rolled to the forearm, a long knife at his hip because a man like him did not walk unarmed in his own house. The firelight from her hearth caught the edge of his jaw and the pale slice of his eyes and nothing else. The Alpha King had come to her, alone. No guards. No announcement. He had opened the door of her chamber himself, crossed the room behind her on feet that made no sound, and stood 3 steps away watching her breathe against the window. And she had not known. Her heart was doing something frantic and ugly in her chest. The thing was doing something worse. It had come awake the second he had spoken. Not spoken, breathed. And it was pulling toward him now, pulling hard, and her whole body had gone hot and strange with the effort of holding it down. She did not step back from the window. She did not know why. She should have. Any sensible girl would have. Any sensible girl would have fallen to her knees and pressed her forehead to the floor and waited to find out if she was going to live the night. She stood her ground. He noticed. His head tilted, just that fraction again, the same as in the courtyard. "Most people flinch," he said, "when I come into a room." She watched him. "Most people flinch," he went on, unhurried, "when I breathe in a room. You didn't even jump. You heard my voice behind you and you turned, and you looked at me, and you didn't—" He searched for the word. "Contract. Everyone contracts. When they see me, they pull in, like something's about to hit them. You don't." He pushed off the door frame. 1 step closer. She felt it in the floor. "Why is that?" She could not answer. He knew she could not answer. That was the game he was playing. She understood suddenly. He was asking her questions he knew she could not answer, because he wanted to see what her silence did when pressed. He wanted to see the shape of it, and she could do nothing but stand there and let him. "I've killed men," he said conversationally. He was walking now, slow, around the perimeter of the room, not toward her, not yet, just circling. "I've killed a lot of men, and some women. Not as many women, but some. I've killed people who begged. I've killed people who spat. I've killed a priest once who cursed me for 12 minutes straight before I cut his tongue out, and the whole time he cursed me, I had the sense that he was performing, that the curse was a thing he'd rehearsed. Most people rehearse when they're afraid. That's what fear does. It sends people back to something they already know how to do. Praying, weeping, cursing, threatening, it's all very—" He paused near the fire and held his hands out to the heat absently. "Predictable, in my experience." He turned and looked at her. "You," he said, "are not rehearsing anything." He walked toward her. She did not move. He stopped an arm's length away. Closer, the eyes were even worse than she remembered. There was intelligence in them, a waiting, careful, very cold intelligence. Not madness, not bloodlust, something much harder than either. "What are you?" he said. Quiet. She had no answer. She had no way to give an answer. She looked at him. And he, King Adric Vale, the butcher of the brews, the man who had broken 3 wives and a general and a priest, he was the one who flinched. Just the barest quarter-inch. The pupils of his gray eyes went small for an instant, like he had been looked at by something that looked back harder than he had expected. He recovered instantly. His face went still again. "I felt it," he said. "In the courtyard. When you looked at me. Something. Under your skin. Like—" He shook his head once, as if the word annoyed him. like a struck stone. A hum. I felt it in rogue alphas before they lose control. I felt it in old relics dug out of tombs. He stopped. I've never felt it in a girl who can't speak. He lifted his hand, not to touch her, to hold it in the air, 2 inches from her chest, between the two of them, palm flat. It's in there, he said, soft. Isn't it? She did not nod. She did not shake her head. She did absolutely nothing except breathe, and even the breathing was a negotiation. His hand hovered. Then, very slowly, he dropped it. All right, he said. All right, not tonight. He stepped back. The air between them released like a held cough. At the door, he paused. He did not turn to look at her. They told me, he said, that your family sent you here to die, that your father thought the sight of you would insult me, that it was his way of insulting me without having to pay for the insult, because he was using a daughter nobody would miss. He tilted his head toward the doorframe, toward the corridor, toward the whole weight of the fortress. Do you know what I think, Lyra Dane? Her name, in his mouth, was a stone dropping into deep water. I think, he said, your father had no idea what he was putting in that cart. I think he spent 19 years looking at you and seeing nothing because he didn't have the equipment to see. And I think he's going to find out eventually what he gave away. And when he does, he's going to scream. And I think when he screams, you won't be sorry. He opened the door. Sleep, he said over his shoulder. Eat what Oda brings you. Don't leave the tower. I'll send for you when I want you. He stepped through. The door closed. And Lyra Dane, who had not made a sound in 19 years of being alive, pressed both hands flat against the window glass, lowered her forehead between them, and stood in that position for a very long time while, inside her chest, the thing that had no name at all turned over once more and began, very slowly, to wake. Outside, the snow kept coming. It came down on the black towers, and on the curtain wall, and on the distant mountains, and on the empty road back toward the house that had thrown her away. It came down on all of it without mercy, without preference, without sound, the way she had learned, long ago, that the only honest things in the world always came. In the hearth, the fire guttered low, then steadied, and somewhere far below her, in the heart of the black fortress, King Adric Vale walked the length of an empty corridor with his hands in loose fists at his sides, and for the first time in 11 years of ruling a kingdom by fear, he was the one who did not know what was going to happen next. She did not sleep that night. The fire burned itself down to orange coals and then to gray ash, and still Lyra sat in the chair by the hearth with her hands folded in her lap and her eyes on the door, waiting for it to open again. It did not open. But every time the wind rattled the shutters, she flinched, and every time the building settled, old stone, old beams, a fortress breathing in its sleep, she thought she heard footsteps. And every time she heard footsteps that weren't there, she had to put her palm flat against her chest and press, hard, to keep the thing inside her from coming up again. It had wanted to come up when he was in the room. It had wanted to come up so badly that her teeth had ached with it. And now that he was gone, it did not want to lie back down. It turned. It rolled. It pushed against the inside of her ribs like an animal that had smelled something on the wind and was no longer satisfied with the cage. She did not understand it. She had understood it for 12 years as a thing that wanted out when she was frightened or angry or hurt. Simple triggers. Predictable triggers. She had learned to see them coming and shut them down. But this was different. This was the thing inside her waking up for a reason she did not know, because of a man she had met once, and it scared her more than any of her father's shoutings had ever scared her. Because for the first time in her life, she wasn't sure the cage was going to hold. Gray light came into the window a long time later. She had not moved. Her legs had gone to sleep hours ago and were now past sleep, into that numb, distant place where they didn't quite feel like hers. When the door opened, she could not have stood up if she had tried. Oda came in with a tray. She set the tray down on the little table by the fire, looked at Lyra, looked at the cold hearth, and let out a short, flat sound through her nose that might have been a laugh or might have been a curse. "Sat up all night," Oda said. Not a question. Lyra looked at her. "Fire out! Food on the tray from last night not eaten. You sat in that chair like somebody nailed you to it." Oda was already moving. She knelt at the hearth, scraped out the ash, laid kindling with the efficient rough hands of a woman who had done it 10,000 times. I don't know what he said to you. I don't want to know. But I'll tell you something for free, girl, and you can take it or leave it. He came to this tower last night on his own 2 feet. He doesn't do that. In 11 years, he doesn't do that. Not once. Not for anyone. She struck a flint. The kindling caught. Orange light crawled up the fresh wood. Whatever you are, Oda said, not looking at her, you've got his attention. That's worse than not having it. You hear me? Lyra did not nod. She was too tired to lie and too frightened to agree. Oda stood, brushed the ash off her apron, looked at her, hard, for a long moment, and then her face did the thing it had done the evening before, that small, unwilling shift that was not softness but something in the same family. Eat, she said. Wash. I brought you a clean dress. Gray, not white. You're done being an offering. He said so himself last night to the chamberlain. Gray's a better color on you anyway. She left. Lyra sat for another long minute. Then she pushed herself up out of the chair, and the pins and needles in her legs were so sharp she had to grip the mantel to stay upright, and she stood there breathing through her teeth with the pain until her knees remembered themselves. She ate a little of the bread. She drank the hot, dark drink, which tasted of roots and something bitter. She washed her face in the basin, and the water was so cold it made her head ring. She put on the gray dress, which was heavier than the white one, and warmer, and fit her across the shoulders in a way nothing from her mother's house had ever fit her. Then she sat down in the chair again and waited, because waiting was the only thing anyone had ever asked her to do well. She waited all day. No one came. Not the king, not the chamberlain. Oda came twice, once with a midday meal and once at dusk to tend the fire, and each time she said almost nothing. The fortress made its sounds around her, distant shouts from the training yard, the ring of a smith somewhere below, the slow, irregular tolling of a bell she still did not understand. Snow fell in the window, stopped, started again. It was past dark the second night when the knock came. Not Oda's knock. Oda did not knock. A man's knock, 3 sharp raps. And before she had time to stand, the door opened and a young soldier stood in the hall with a torch in one hand. Not much older than her, thin, nervous, clean-shaven, in a place where most men wore beards for warmth. "My lady," he said, and then caught himself and rephrased. "Lady Dain, the king requests your presence in the lower hall." She stood. The soldier waited while she wrapped a shawl around her shoulders, gray wool, also from Oda, and then he stepped aside and held the torch to light the corridor, and she followed him. The lower hall was 6 flights down. The stairs were a tight spiral, cut into the stone, the kind of stairs a man could defend against an army with one sword and a steady hand. The torch threw their shadows long against the curve of the wall, and the air got colder as they descended, colder and older, and full of the iron smell she had noticed her first morning. By the time they reached the bottom, Lyra's breath was steaming. The young soldier led her through a short corridor, past 2 silent men-at-arms who did not look at her, and through a tall iron-banded door into the lower hall. It was not, she realized almost at once, an audience. It was something worse. The hall was long and narrow, with a vaulted black ceiling and a long table down the middle, and the table was full of men, a dozen of them. Most of them she did not know by sight, but she knew the kind by sight. Old men in heavy furs, middle-aged men with weathered faces and rings on their fingers, 2 or 3 younger men with the sharp, restless eyes of alphas who had been in fights they had won. Bannermen, vassals, the inner circle of a king who ruled by blood, and at the head of the table, in a chair no larger than any of the others, a choice, she understood, not an oversight, sat Adric Vale. He was dressed the same as the night before. Black shirt, no crown, a knife at his hip. He was eating slowly, tearing bread with his hands, not looking up when the soldier brought her in. Every other man looked up. A silence fell on this hall. Not a respectful silence. A curious silence, the silence of men who have been told a story and are now being shown the exhibit. "Ah," said a voice from halfway down the table. Cheerful, carrying, the wrong kind of cheerful. The Dain girl. She knew the voice before she saw the face. Lord Wren Halleck, the gray-bearded warden who had tried to talk the king out of choosing her in the courtyard. He was leaning back in his chair with a cup of wine in his hand, and he was smiling at her the way a man smiles at a dog that has wandered into a room where it doesn't belong. "Your Grace," Halleck said, turning the smile toward the king, "forgive an old man his directness. But is it wise? To bring her here, to this table, in front of the men who serve you?" Adric tore another piece of bread, did not look up. "I wanted her here," he said. "Yes, Your Grace, I see that. I only mean, this is the table where you discuss the defense of the Western marches, where you weigh the loyalty of houses, where you decide whose head rolls and whose doesn't, bringing a woman to it, a Dain woman, a mute Dain woman." He spread his hands, palms up, the old gesture of the reasonable man. "Men will talk, Your Grace." "Men are already talking, Lord Halleck." "Yes, but let them talk. It saves me the trouble of guessing what's on their minds." One of the younger alphas at the far end of the table let out a short laugh. Not at Halleck, at the line, the way men laugh when a king makes a joke and they know the correct answer is to laugh. Halleck did not laugh. He smiled thinly and took a drink and did not look at Lyra again. The young soldier led her to a chair, not near the king, 3 seats down, on his left, between an older man she didn't know and an empty place. She sat. Her shawl slipped. She caught it. A servant appeared at her elbow with a cup of wine. She did not take it. She set her hands in her lap and she looked at nothing in particular, because looking at nothing had always been safer than looking at anything. The meal went on. It went on around her like a storm going on around a stone. Men talked of border patrols and grain stores and a bandit clan in the northern passes. Men argued about whether the thaw would come early this year or late. A serving woman brought out a platter of roast pork, and the men tore into it with their hands, the way men eat in places where softness is suspect. And once, she felt it, she did not see it, a piece of gristle landed on the edge of her plate, thrown from somewhere down the table. Not an accident, a test. She did not react. She simply picked it off, set it aside on her knife, and waited. Somebody at the far end of the table laughed. It was not a kind laugh. "Lady Dain," Halleck said after a while, in the bright social voice of a man beginning a conversation he had planned in advance. "Indulge us, would you? We are curious." She looked at him. "How does a woman who does not speak," Halleck said, "tell a man she loves him?" Silence. "Or tell him she hates him," Halleck went on, mild. "Or tell him to leave her alone. Or tell him, for that matter, that she wishes him a long life and many sons. It's a fascinating question, isn't it? We've been discussing it before you came in." A couple of the younger men at his end of the table smirked. One of them, a thin, pale-eyed man in a black and silver tunic she didn't recognize, was openly grinning. "I ask," Halleck said, "only because our king has done us the honor of choosing you, which means, in the fullness of time, we may all have to address you, petition you, pay you respects, and none of us, Lady Dain, have any idea how you answer. So, perhaps, a demonstration? For the benefit of your future vassals." He leaned forward. The firelight caught the gray of his beard. The smile was still on his face. "How do you say yes, Lady Dain?" She looked at him. She did not move her face. She did not move her hands. She waited. "How do you say no?" Waited. "How do you say—" He spread his hands again, the reasonable man, the helpful man. "I accept the honor my king has done me, and I swear to serve this realm faithfully all my days." How do you say that, Lady Dain, with no tongue in your mouth? The word tongue was not accidental. She felt it land. 2 of the men at Halleck's end laughed openly now. The pale-eyed man in black and silver said something under his breath to his neighbor, and the neighbor snorted. At the head of the table, Adric had stopped eating. He had not looked up. His hand was resting on the edge of his plate, fingers very slightly curled. To a man who did not know him, he would have looked entirely at ease. To Lyra, watching from under her lashes, the stillness of him was the same stillness as a drawn bow. She did not look at the king. She looked at Halleck. She held his eyes for a long, slow count, and she did the only thing she could do. She smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was a small smile, the smile of a person who has understood something the speaker did not mean to reveal. It moved only the corners of her mouth. She held it just long enough for Halleck to see that it was deliberate, that she had chosen it, that she had aimed it, and then she let it go, and she returned her eyes to the table. Halleck's own smile flickered. For a second, it was not quite there. Then he pasted it back on, a little too wide, and said, "Well, that's charming, but not perhaps an answer." "It was an answer," Adric said. Quiet, without looking up. Halleck's head turned. "Your Grace? She told you she thought you were being an ass." Adric finally lifted his eyes. "I thought it was obvious." A beat of total silence. Then from the far end of the table, the thin, pale-eyed man in black and silver laughed. Openly, loud, a bright cracking laugh that filled the hall. "By the bruise," he said. "She did too. She absolutely did. Look at his face, Wren. That's the face of a man who just got red." Laughter rolled down the table. Not all of it. The older men kept their faces flat. But enough. Enough that Halleck's color changed, and his hand around the wine cup tightened, and the pale-eyed man kept laughing, and Adric did not stop him, and Halleck finally forced a laugh of his own, thin, brittle, and said, of course, a jest. Forgive me, my lady." He raised his cup to her. She did not raise anything back. She looked at him, flat-eyed, and then she looked down at her plate, and she cut a piece of bread with her knife, and she ate it, and the hall went back to its business. But something had moved in the room. She had felt it move. A small shift, a small weight, a small rearrangement of which men were laughing and which men were not. The thin, pale-eyed man was still looking at her, openly now. He caught her eye, across the length of the table, and inclined his head to her. Not a full bow. A tilt. The kind of gesture a man makes to another man, across a field, after a well-struck blow. She did not return it. She did not know what it was yet, but she did not like it. There was something in the shape of him, in the way he had laughed at exactly the right moment, in the way his eyes stayed on her too long, that put the thing in her chest on a low, attentive hum. She looked at her plate. She ate her bread. She waited for the meal to end. It ended an hour later. The men stood, made their bows, drifted in ones and twos toward the great doors at the far end. Halleck went early, without looking at her. The pale-eyed man in black and silver stayed late. He was laughing with two of the younger alphas near the fire, his back to the high table, but every so often his head would turn. Just a degree, just enough. And she could feel his attention find her and settle, the way a man settles a hand on a horse's neck, checking it was still there. Adric had not risen. He had not spoken to her after the one line. He sat with his cup in his hand and watched the men leave, and when only a handful were left in the hall, he turned his head and said, "Lady Dane, sit with me." She rose, crossed the space, and took the chair at his right. The chair was warm. Someone had been sitting in it earlier, she thought, and had vacated it when the king called her. A courtesy, or a message. She could not tell. For a while he said nothing. He turned the cup slowly in his fingers. The firelight moved on the surface of the wine. "Halleck," he said finally, "what did you think of him?" She looked at him. "Right," he said. "Stupid question." He set the cup down. "Think it at me anyway. I'll guess." She blinked once. "You thought," Adric said, "that he is a man who hates me and who has not yet worked out that I know." She held very still. "You thought he was speaking to you but watching me. You thought every word he used had a hook in it, tongue, addressed, demonstration, and that he was not speaking for his own entertainment, but to see what the other men at the table did with each hook, who laughed at which word, who didn't." He paused. "You thought he was counting." She did not move. "Am I close, Lady Diane?" She looked at him, and something in her face, she could not help it. She could not school every muscle, not for this, must have moved because he let out a short breath through his nose and said, "Yes, I thought so." He did not sound surprised. He sounded tired. "Wren Halleck has been my father's man, and then my man, for 31 years. He gave me a wooden sword when I was 6. He taught me how to hold a saddle. When I took this throne, at 18, with my father's blood on my hands, he was the first man to kneel to me. He was the first man I trusted." He was turning the cup again. Slow, even turns. Men get tired. Men get ambitious. Men look at a king and think, "I raised him. I could unmake him." Men are not mysterious, Lady Dane. They are mostly very predictable. He looked at her. The man at the far end of the table, black and silver, blonde, laughs when he's meant to. She looked at him. That's Lord Cassian Voss. He is the warden of the Southern Hills and a distant cousin of my mother's, and if the men I pay to listen in low rooms are earning their coin, he is the man Halleck has chosen to put on my throne when the time comes. Her breath snagged, just once. He caught it. Don't, he said mildly. Don't change your face. Voss is watching us right now, from over by the fire. He cannot hear us. He is reading us. He is very good at reading. He is, in many ways, a more dangerous man than Halleck, because Halleck still believes he is loyal to something. His idea of the realm, his idea of my father, something. Voss believes in nothing. Voss believes that the throne is a chair, and chairs do not care who sits in them. She did not turn her head. She did not let her eyes flick. But she was aware, now, aware of the pale-eyed man by the fire and the low hum in her chest that had been there for the whole meal and had not gone away and was not, she realized now, a reaction to the king at all. You are wondering, Adric said, why I am telling you this. She was. I am telling you this, he said, because as of last night, you are the most interesting thing in my court. And as of an hour ago, every man in this hall knows it. Halleck walked in here tonight intending to make you cry. He walked out of here having been mocked by a silent girl and a king who defended her. That is, he considered his wine. Not a thing he will forgive. And Voss sat through the entire meal watching you and smiled when you smiled, and I do not like the shape of his smile. He leaned a fraction toward her. So, he said very quietly, understand me. You are not a guest here. You are not, whatever the Chamberlain is telling people, a bride candidate. You are, he searched and did not find a word he liked and settled for a piece on a board, a piece whose rules nobody yet understands, including you, especially you. Am I making sense, Lady Dane? She nodded. Once. Good. He straightened. His voice went back to its ordinary volume. Oda will take you back to the tower. You will not leave it tomorrow. The day after, I will send for you, and we will speak of other things. Don't look at Voss when you leave. Don't look at Halleck either. Look at the door and walk. She rose. She walked the length of the hall with her eyes on the door. She did not look at Halleck, where he stood by the great doors pretending to be in conversation with a sour-faced old lord. She did not look at Voss by the fire, though she felt his attention move with her every step of the way, like a hand trailed along the top of a wall. She reached the doors. The young soldier with the torch was waiting. She followed him back up the spiral stairs, 6 flights, and the fortress breathed around her in the dark. And when she reached her tower room, she closed the door behind her and put her back against it and slid slowly, slowly down until she was sitting on the cold floor. The thing in her chest was humming still. It had not stopped humming since Voss had looked at her. It did not hum for Adric the way it hummed for Voss. For Adric, it pulled. A long, deep tidal pull, like recognition. For Voss, it hummed the way a struck string hums near a crack. Not a call, a warning, a high, thin note that said danger, danger, danger. Not the same, not safe, not safe. She sat on the floor and pressed both hands flat to her sternum, and she did not pray. She did not know how to pray. No one had ever taught her. But she did something close to it, in the shape of words she could not say aloud. Let me figure this out. Let me figure this out before it comes up. Let me figure this out before he sees. The thing in her chest did not answer. It only hummed. She did not know how long she sat there. She slept eventually, slumped against the door, and when Oda came in at dawn, Oda did not wake her. Oda simply built up the fire, set the tray on the table, looked at the girl asleep on the floor in her gray dress, muttered something under her breath that might have been child, and went out again, closing the door very softly. Lyra did not leave the tower the next day. That was an order, and she did not intend to break it. But the day after, the day Adric had said he would send for her, noon came and went, and no one came. Afternoon. Oda brought food and said nothing. Evening. The bell below told its irregular pattern. Still nothing. At dusk, the young soldier did not come either. At dusk, the door opened without a knock, and it was not the soldier. It was Lord Cassian Voss. He stepped into the room as if he had been invited. He had a fur-trimmed cloak over his shoulders and a small leather book in one hand and an easy smile on his face, and he closed the door behind him, slowly, deliberately, so that the latch clicked, without ever taking his eyes off her. "Lady Dane," he said, "forgive the intrusion." Every hair on her arms stood up. The thing in her chest did not hum now. It screamed, a soundless inside-the-skull scream, the scream of a creature smelling a predator. She fought it down. She fought it down so hard her hands went cold. She did not rise from her chair. She did not acknowledge him. She looked at him the way she had learned to look at things that could not be avoided, flat and patient. "The king," Voss said, drifting toward the fire as if she had invited him to warm himself, "is in the lower bailey with Lord Halleck. There's been a report from the northern passes. Bandits moved on a supply column last night. 4 men dead. Grain burned. He will be there some hours." He turned, smiling. "I thought, in the meantime, a conversation, just the two of us. We were not properly introduced the other night." He set the leather book on her table. He pulled the other chair, the chair she had not used, close to hers, sat down in it, crossed one leg over the other, and settled in as if this were his own sitting room. "I should say at the outset, my lady, that I am an enormous admirer of yours." She did not move. "I have watched, these past 3 days, a great many men in this fortress lose their footing over you, including, I might add, the king himself, which is no small accomplishment." The smile did not leave his face. The pale eyes did not leave hers. "And I have asked myself as I watched, what is it about her? And I have come to a theory. I would very much like to share it with you." The thing in her chest was shrieking now. It wanted out. It wanted out the way a drowning man wants air. She pressed her palm against her sternum, hard, under the shawl where he could not see it, and she held on. "My theory," Voss said, leaning forward, "is that you are not in fact mute. That you are not some poor damaged creature, some discarded daughter, some flaw." The word rolled off his tongue in a way that made her stomach turn. "My theory is that you are something older. Something that used to walk this frontier before men with kings and courts got here. Something that certain families have been breeding for, hoping for, praying for." He tilted his head. "Something that occasionally, in a very unlucky or a very lucky generation, is born into a bloodline that has no idea what to do with it. A bloodline like the Danes, who assumed you were broken because they were too stupid to look twice." She did not let her face change. She did not let her hand move. But inside her, something had tipped, and she could hear her own heartbeat in her ears. "I'm not stupid, Lady Dane." He leaned closer. The firelight was on one side of his face. The other side was in shadow, and the shadow made his eyes look deeper, darker, a wet sort of dark. "I have spent many years," he said, very softly, "looking for something like you. I had begun to think I would not find it. And then a little snowbound cart came rattling up to the gate of the Black Fortress, and out stepped a girl in a white dress, and I looked at her, and I felt it, my lady, in the courtyard, like a bell struck in my bones, and I knew." He reached slowly toward her. She did not flinch. She could not flinch. Flinching would tell him she was afraid, and the worst thing she could do with this man. She understood it instantly, in the back of her brain, in the part of her that had been a cornered animal her whole life. The worst thing she could do was confirm anything he thought he knew. His hand stopped an inch from her face. He did not touch her. "I wonder," he said, "what would happen if I made you use it?" The thing in her chest lunged. It lunged the way a dog on a chain lunges at a throat. Everything in her, every cell, straining forward, wanting him, wanting to break him, wanting to reach into his mouth and pull the voice out of him and feed it back to him, wanting to lift him off the floor and hang him in the air and show him how much of her had been asleep, and she held it. She held it. She held it with everything she was. She held it so hard her vision grayed at the edges, and the firelight went black for a half-second, and a thin trickle of blood came out of her left nostril and slid down her lip. She tasted it, iron, warm, and she did not move. Voss watched the drop of blood. His pupils dilated, slowly, like a man watching something he had hoped to see. "There you are," he whispered. He sat back. He picked up his leather book. He tucked it under his arm. He stood, adjusted his cloak, and looked down at her with an expression that was no longer smiling, that had become, in the last 10 seconds, something still and cold and reverent, the face of a man looking at an altar. "I will not tell him," Voss said quietly. "Not yet. You have my word. I suspect you don't trust my word, and you are right not to. But on this specific matter, Lady Dane, I need you to live, and I need the king not to know what I know. So on this, for now we are aligned." He smiled again, faintly. "It must be strange for you, to be aligned with anyone." He moved toward the door. At the door he paused, one hand on the latch, and turned his head. "When the time comes," he said, almost gently, "you will have a choice to make. About him, about the throne, about what you are going to do with what you have. I would like you to remember, when that time comes, that I am the one who knew first, not him, me." He opened the door, he stepped through, the door closed. And Lyra Dane, alone in the tower, fell sideways out of her chair and hit the floor on her knees and her hands, and she stayed there shaking, with the thing in her chest clawing at her ribs from the inside and blood on her upper lip, and her whole body burning with the effort of not letting go. She stayed on the floor until the fire burned low. She stayed on the floor until she could trust her hands to be hands again. When she finally got up, she moved to the window, and she pressed her forehead against the cold glass, and she looked out at the black waste of the mountains. And for the first time since she had arrived, she understood something very clearly. She was not going to survive this fortress by being still. Stillness had been her armor her whole life. Stillness had been the only thing that had kept her alive in her father's house. But in this place, stillness was a door Cassian Voss had just walked through, and she could not afford to leave it unguarded again. If she did nothing, Voss would come back. He would come back tomorrow, or the day after, or in a week, and next time he would not stop at an inch from her face. Next time he would reach out, and he would press, and he would find the thing in her chest, and he would take it, not from her body, because she did not think it worked that way, but from her control of it. He would make her let it out. For his reasons. For his uses. For his throne. She looked at her own reflection in the dark glass. A thin girl in a gray dress, with a thin line of dried blood on her upper lip and circles under her eyes that looked like bruises. She dragged the back of her hand across her mouth. The blood came away. And Lyra Dane, who had been sold by her father and discarded by her mother and offered up to a king who was supposed to kill her, made the first decision she had ever made entirely for herself. She was not going to wait to be sent for. She was going to find the king, and she was going to tell him, with no voice, with no tongue, with only whatever she was, that there was a traitor in his own hall, and that the traitor had been in her room, and that the traitor had come an inch from her face and had left with a piece of her in his pocket, and that if Adric Vale did not act, and act quickly, the throne beneath him was already on fire. She turned from the window. She picked up the shawl from where it had fallen on the floor. She wrapped it around her shoulders. Her hands were still shaking, but her feet were steadier than they had been in 3 days. She walked to the door. She put her hand on the latch. She paused. One long breath, one press of the palm to the sternum, one last silent not yet to the thing inside her. And then she opened the door and she stepped out into the corridor, alone, into a fortress she did not know, full of men who wanted to use her, to hunt her, to own her, to break her. The torch in the corridor sconce burned low, throwing her shadow long against the black stone. Somewhere far below, the irregular bell began, again, to toll. The corridor was empty. That was the first thing Lyra noticed, and it was not a good thing. There had been a guard on her door every time Oda had come and gone. She had heard him, the shift of a boot, the quiet cough, and now there was none. The sconce torch had burned low, and there was no man beneath it. And the door at the end of the corridor where the stairs began stood slightly open in a way that looked, even to a girl who had never lived in a fortress, deeply wrong. She stood for a moment in her own doorway, weighing it. Voss had come and gone. The guard had vanished either just before he arrived or shortly after he left. That was not an accident. That was a man clearing a path and then forgetting, in his hurry to get away, to put the path back the way he had found it. She could go back into her room. She could bolt the door. There was a bolt. She had checked that first hour. And she could wait for Oda and wait for Adric and pretend this evening had not happened. She thought about it for one long breath. Then she thought about Voss's face an inch from hers and the pale wet dark of his eyes. And she let the breath out and she stepped out into the corridor and pulled her own door shut behind her. She did not take the main stairs. She had come up them with the young soldier 2 nights ago, and she had paid attention. Not to every turn. She had not been that steady on her feet, but to the general shape. Main stairs went down through the central keep. Main stairs passed the great hall. Main stairs would have guards at the foot of them, and those guards, if Voss had arranged her evening, might also have been arranged. There was a servant's stair. She had seen it on the way up, a narrow slot in the wall 2 floors below, the kind of stair that let kitchen maids move through a great house without inconveniencing anyone who mattered. She would find that one. She did eventually. It took her longer than it should have. The corridors of the East Tower did not run in straight lines the way the corridors in her father's house had run. They bent around old defensive turns, doubled back on themselves, opened into small empty galleries full of shields that no one had dusted in a generation. She had to guess twice and backtrack once. When she finally found the narrow door tucked behind an arras, she had to stop and put her hand against the wall, because her knees had gone strange on her again, and she was still tasting the iron on her upper lip even though the blood was long gone. The servant's stair was dark. She went down it with one hand on the rough stone of the wall and the other clutched against her chest, feeling her way, one step, another, and somewhere around the second landing she heard voices below her and stopped cold. 2 men, not soldiers. The timbre was wrong, the laugh was wrong. Kitchen men, she thought. Night shift. One of them said something about a pot, and the other laughed, and she waited, pressed flat against the wall, until a door opened below her and closed again and the voices went away. She kept going. She did not know yet how she was going to find the king in a fortress the size of the Black Fortress, at this hour, with no voice. She was running on something like instinct and something like fury and a very thin layer of plan on top of both. The plan was, find a soldier. Find one she had seen before, preferably. The young one with the torch, if she could. Point. Point until he understood she needed Adric. Refuse to go back to the tower. Stand in a corridor until someone had to do something about her. It was not a good plan. It was the plan she had. She came out of the servant's stair into a narrow back corridor that smelled of tallow and old smoke. Above her, somewhere, the irregular bell was still tolling. 3 tolls. A pause. 2 tolls. A longer pause. And she realized, as she stood there listening, that it had been going all evening. That it had been going, she thought, since before Voss had come into her room. It was a pattern. It meant something. A door opened on her left. Light spilled out. She flinched sideways, pressed herself against the wall. And then, when she saw the woman in the doorway, she almost laughed with relief. Oda. Oda, with her sleeves rolled up and her hair tied back, holding an empty tray, staring at Lyra like she had grown a second head. "What in the name of all the cold hells?" Oda said. "Are you doing down here?" Lyra stepped into the light. She grabbed Oda's wrist. She squeezed hard. She pointed at herself, then jabbed the same finger at the ceiling, then at her own chest again, and then drew a sharp line across her throat and pointed upward at the ceiling again. Him, above. Someone wants him dead. I need him. And she knew, even as she was doing it, that it was nonsense. That it was the clumsy, desperate hand-signing of a girl who had never been allowed to develop a sign language of her own because no one in her father's house had ever bothered to learn one. But Oda was not stupid. Oda had been running a great house's service staff for 30 years, and Oda had seen something she did not like in Lyra's eyes, and Oda was already moving. Tower. You're coming back to the tower. No! She caught Lyra's arm as Lyra tried to twist away. Not back to yours. Mine. My room. You come with me. Now. Lyra shook her head, hard. She pointed at the ceiling again. She mouthed. She could shape sounds with her mouth. She had never been able to voice them, but she could shape them, and she could feel the frustration of it now, could feel the whole flat weight of her life pressing down on her. The king. She mouthed it 3 times. The king. The king. The king. Oda went still, her eyes sharpened. The king, she repeated low. You need the king. Lyra nodded, fierce. Right now! Lyra nodded again. Why? Lyra pointed at her own chest, at her face, at the door she had come from, which was not, geographically, anywhere near her tower, but Oda would understand. She mimed a man entering a room. She jabbed a finger at her own throat. She drew a shape, a crest, badly, but she drew it. 2 vertical lines, a diamond, the best approximation she could manage of what Voss had worn on his tunic. She had been looking at it for 20 minutes. She had memorized it by accident, because her body had been trying to memorize an exit route and had memorized him instead. Oda's face changed, went tight, went old. Him. Oda did not name him. That was interesting. Oda knew and did not want to say it out loud, even in an empty corridor. He came to your room, Lyra nodded. Alone, Lyra nodded. Did he? Lyra shook her head, a hard, sharp no. Not that. Not quite that. Worse than that, in a way Oda did not have the tools to understand, but not that. Oda let out a breath through her teeth, slow and long, and it occurred to Lyra that Oda had just been preparing herself to hear an answer she had heard before, in this fortress, about other girls. All right, Oda said. All right, you're not going back to your tower. He knows your tower. He was in your tower, unguarded, which means there are men in this house who have been paid to not stand where they were told to stand, and I don't know which ones yet. You stay with me until I find the king. She tossed the tray onto a side table and grabbed Lyra's wrist. Come on, keep up. Don't stop. They went. But Oda did not take her back up. Oda took her down and sideways, and through a room that smelled of onions, and then through another room that smelled of horse. And Lyra understood, somewhere in the middle of all of it, that Oda knew the service corridors of this fortress, the way Lyra knew the fields behind her father's stables. By heart, by muscle, by the 1,000 small grooves a life wears into a place. They came out into a square courtyard Lyra had never seen before. It was the size of a small market, ringed by low buildings, stables on one side, a forge on the other, a long covered walkway that ran to a massive iron gate set into the inner curtain wall. The snow was coming down again, thin and mean. There were men in the courtyard, grooms, a blacksmith's boy banking the forge fire for the night, 2 guards at the gate. Oda tucked Lyra close against her body and walked her briskly along the wall, head down, just another servant and her charge moving between duties. The king, Oda muttered, low into Lyra's ear as they walked, is not in the hall. The hall's empty. I know that because I just came from it. He's either in his solar in the west tower, or he's still out in the lower bailey, or he's riding. The bell is ringing the muster pattern. You hear that? 323. That's ride ready. Somebody got a bad report tonight, which means half the fortress is booted and cloaked and waiting to see what he tells them. She paused at the corner of the stables. If he's in the bailey, I can get you to him. If he's in his solar, I can't. Halleck keeps that hall. Halleck's men on every door. And Halleck, I don't trust today. Not after what you've just told me. She looked down at Lyra, and her voice dropped lower still. Girl, listen to me. In about 2 minutes, I'm going to walk you past a guard, and he is going to ask me what I'm doing with you. And I'm going to lie to him. And you are going to stand behind me and look like a servant girl who has been crying, which should not be hard, because you look like a servant girl who has been crying. If he doesn't buy it, we turn around and we go back the way we came, and we run. Do you understand? Lyra nodded. All right, come on. They rounded the corner of the stables. The guard at the gate was older, bearded, heavy in his cloak against the snow, and bored. He looked up as they approached, a little surprised to see 2 women coming at him from the service side. Oda, he said, a question. Errand for the steward, Oda said briskly. Girl's got to take a message to a groom in the lower bailey, and she doesn't know the way, and if I send her alone, she'll freeze to death before she finds him. Let us through, Bren. I'll vouch for her. The guard, Bren, glanced at Lyra. His eyes lingered. That the Dane girl? That's the Dane girl. Chamberlain said she stays in the East Tower. Chamberlain says a lot of things. The king said she was a guest. Guests run errands if I tell them to. Oda's voice was a perfect blend of brisk and long-suffering, the voice of a senior serving woman who had been managing guards for 20 years and would not be argued with about a small matter at the end of a long day. Bren chewed the inside of his cheek, looked at Lyra again. Lyra kept her eyes down. She did not have to fake the shaking. Her hands were visibly trembling, and the thin line where the blood had been was still faintly pink on her upper lip, and her hair was a mess from how she had been pressed against the wall of the stairwell. She looked exactly like what Oda had said she looked like. All right, Bren said. Go on. Be quick. If the Chamberlain hears... The Chamberlain hears what I tell him, Oda said, and swept Lyra through. The lower bailey was a different country. It was larger than the inner courtyard, much larger, a wide, flat space of stamped earth and snow between the inner wall and the outer one, and it was awake. Torches everywhere. 20, 30 horses already saddled, blowing steam. Men in riding leathers and mail checking girths and tightening buckles. A cluster of officers around a rough table where a map had been unrolled and weighed down with daggers. The air was loud with men's voices and the snorting of horses and the steady ring of a smith somewhere working on a horseshoe that needed to be on a hoof in the next 10 minutes. In the middle of it, Adric Vale. He was standing by the map table with his head bent, listening to a big gray-haired man in a captain's mail. The captain was gesturing, stabbing a finger at the map, shaking his head. Adric was not gesturing. Adric was listening. His cloak was thrown back over one shoulder, and the long knife at his hip had been replaced with a proper sword. And his face, even at this distance, had gone from the cold stillness of the high table 2 nights ago to something harder, something more lit. The face of a man whose body had already decided that it was going to be on a horse very soon. Oda stopped at the edge of the bailey, in the shadow of the inner wall, and gripped Lyra by both shoulders and turned her to face her. "I'm not walking you into the middle of that," Oda said, low and hard. "I can't. He'll shout me away, and one of the captains will drag you back to your tower. You go alone. You walk across this yard, and you don't look at anyone except him, and you do not stop until you are close enough to touch his sleeve, and then you grab it. Do you hear me? You grab his sleeve. He'll stop. He'll turn. He'll see you. After that, I don't know what happens, but I know he won't let anyone put a hand on you in front of these men. Not after last night. Not after the way he looked at Halleck." Lyra nodded. Oda's fingers tightened on her shoulders. "Girl, go." She went. It was the longest walk of her life. The bailey was not more than 60 paces, maybe 70, but every pace had a man in it, and every man had eyes. She felt them stick to her as she moved, not hostile mostly, curious, surprised. A woman in a gray dress walking through a muster did not fit. Someone called out, a jeer, not mean, more confusion. "Hey, what's this? Who's this?" Someone else hissed at him to be quiet. She did not look. She put her eyes on the back of Adric's head, and she walked. 1 foot, another. The snow crunched under her slippers. Slippers, she realized for the first time. She was wearing slippers, soft leather things meant for warm floors, and her feet were going numb. And she walked, and the map table got closer, and the gray-haired captain's voice got clearer. "Came down the ridge at dusk, my lord. 2 columns. They knew exactly where the grain wagons would be. It wasn't bandits. It was somebody dressed as bandits and not well enough." And she walked, and then she was there, at the edge of the table, and she stopped, and she reached up, and she grabbed Adric Vale by the sleeve. Every man at the table went silent at once. The captain stopped mid-word. His mouth stayed open for half a beat. Another man's hand dropped to his sword hilt out of pure reflex and then stayed there, uncertain. Adric did not turn right away. He looked down. He looked at her small white hand on the black wool of his sleeve. For a second, the only thing that moved on him was the pulse at the side of his throat, which jumped once. Then he turned. "Lyra," he said. Quiet. A different quiet than he had used in the hall. There was no court in his voice. There was just the voice of a man looking at a woman who should not have been where she was. She did not let go of his sleeve. Her other hand came up. She pointed at her own face, at the faint line where the blood had been. There was nothing there now, but her finger drew it anyway. A thin line from the base of her nose down across her upper lip. Then she pointed back across the bailey, up at the keep, at the high dark shape of the east tower. Then she drew the shape again. 2 vertical lines. The diamond between them. The Voss crest. She stared at Adric's face while she drew it. She watched what his face did. His face did several things, in order, very fast. First, it did not do anything at all. That was the dangerous one. That was the flatness of a man filing information. Then something moved at the corner of his mouth. Not a twitch, something smaller than that, the inside of his cheek being bitten. Then his eyes cut sideways, not at her, at the captain, and back to her. And then his whole face, for one instant, did something she had not seen on him before, and would not have words for afterward. It went cold. Not the cold of the courtyard, not the cold of the high table, not the theatrical cold he used on men like Halleck. A different cold. A working cold. The cold, she thought, of a man who had just been handed a piece of information he had been half expecting for a long time. He put his own hand briefly over hers on his sleeve. He did not squeeze. He did not pat. He just set his hand on top of hers and left it there for one breath. And it was the steadiest thing she had felt in 3 days. Then he lifted her hand off his sleeve and tucked it carefully against her own chest, and he turned back to the table. "Captain Meir," he said. His voice had gone level again. "You will take the men north with Halvard. You will ride at first light, not tonight. You will find out who dressed bandits as bandits, and when you find them, you will take one of them alive, and you will bring him to me, and you will not let him talk to anyone on the way. Am I clear?" "Aye, my lord, but you said tonight, I have changed my mind." Captain Meir's jaw worked. He was an old soldier. He did not like having his mind changed at the last moment on a dark courtyard. But he had also lived through 11 years of serving this king, and he heard in the king's voice the thing that the king had just heard in Lyra's hand. "First light," he said. "Aye, my lord." "Go tell the men. Disperse the muster. No ride tonight. Tell them it's the weather." "Aye." Meir saluted and bowled off into the crowd, calling names. The other officers around the table looked at each other, at Adric, at the silent girl with her hand clutched against her chest, and they read the room very quickly, and they found reasons to be elsewhere. In under 3 minutes, the bailey was still full of men and horses, but the map table was empty except for the 2 of them and one tall, black-cloaked officer who had not left. A younger man, short-bearded, hard-eyed, with a thin old scar cutting through his left eyebrow. He stood by Adric's shoulder with the patient stance of a man who had been told, long ago, never to leave his king's elbow without being told to. "Cale," Adric said quietly, without turning, "find Lord Voss." The officer, Cale, did not move yet. "My lord." "Don't arrest him. Don't speak to him. Don't let him see you. Find out where in this fortress he is. Where in this fortress he has been in the last 3 hours. Who he has spoken to. Who has gone in or out of his quarters tonight, including any servant who has carried so much as a cup of water. Report back to me in the West Solar in 1 hour. Take 2 men you trust with your life and nobody else. Is that clear?" "Aye, my lord." Cale hesitated. "And Lord Halleck?" There was a pause, a long one. "Leave Halleck to me," Adric said. Cale inclined his head and went. Adric turned to Lyra. "Walk with me," he said. "Not to the East Tower. Not anywhere anyone would expect you. With me. Now." She nodded. He did not take her arm. He did not touch her. He simply adjusted his pace to hers and moved. Across the bailey, through a low arch she had not noticed, up a short flight of stone steps, through a guarded door where the guards, his guards, she could feel it in how they stood, snapped straight at the sight of him and did not even glance at her. Up a second stair wider, warmer, through a heavy oak door, into a long room with a fire at one end and a desk at the other and maps pinned to the walls, and a single long couch along one side. And he shut the door and threw the bolt and turned. "Sit," he said. She sat. On the couch. Her knees gave out under her as soon as she bent them, and she sat harder than she meant to. He crossed to a sideboard, poured something dark from a clay jug into a cup, and brought it to her. "Drink it." She took the cup. She drank it. It burned. Something like brandy, but rougher, more honest. Her eyes watered. Her cheeks heated. Her hand stopped shaking for the first time in 2 hours. He took the cup back, set it on the small table beside her, crouched down so his face was level with hers, one knee on the floor, and looked at her. "Voss was in your room tonight." She nodded. "Alone." She nodded. "The guard on your door was gone." She nodded again, and he let out a low, ugly word under his breath. A soldier's word, not a king's word. And the hand that had been resting on his knee closed into a fist and opened again. "Did he touch you?" She hesitated. She shook her head. Then she lifted her own hand, palm out, and held it an inch from her own face. She held it there so he could see. Then she slowly, deliberately, drew her own finger along the line where the blood had been. "He came that close," Adric said. She nodded. "And you bled." She nodded. "Why?" She pressed her palm flat against her sternum. She looked at him. She did not know how to say it. She did not have a way. But she looked at him, and she pressed her hand against her chest, and she made her eyes say it. Because of what is in here, because I held it, because if I had not held it, you would have a crater where your south wing used to be. She did not know if he understood. He was very still. Then he reached up. Slowly, the way a man reaches toward a startled horse, and he put his hand over hers, on her chest, so that his palm was pressed against the back of her hand, and her palm was pressed against her own sternum. He did not push. He simply held. Under his palm, her hand was warm. Under her hand, her sternum was hot in a way that should have worried a physician, and he could feel it. She saw him feel it. His jaw set, and the muscles along the side of his throat went tight. That, he said quietly, that is what he saw. She nodded. And you held it. She nodded. You've been holding it your whole life. She did not nod. She did not shake her head. She just looked at him. Let him make of that what he wanted. Adric closed his eyes. One long moment. When he opened them, he did not look at her. He was looking past her, at the fire, at nothing, and his face had gone into that cold working place again. I have been very stupid, he said. She shook her head, once, sharply. No, I have been very stupid. I thought, he laughed, short, with no amusement in it. I thought he was planning to poison my wine. That's been the shape of it for months, wine or food. He has a kitchen boy, I know he does. I haven't moved on the boy because I wanted to see what he'd do next. I thought he was working up to a cup. I did not think... And here his eyes came back to her, and they were silver and unhappy and clear, the clearest she had seen them. I did not think he was working up to you. He was still holding her hand against her sternum. He did not seem aware of it. She did not take it away. How long, he said, has he been in this fortress tonight? She shook her head. She did not know. No. Right. Of course. But he walked into your tower unguarded, which means he has bought or frightened at least 2 men I thought were mine, probably more, probably 4, probably 6. And Halleck, he stopped, shook his head. Halleck did not come with me to the Bailey tonight. Halleck is not here. Halleck was at dinner, and then Halleck excused himself to attend to a matter of accounts. Accounts. He made the words sound like a knife. Your second night I almost had him. I almost had him. Lyra. I had Mears report that he had been meeting with a Southern rider. I had Cale's word on a sealed letter. And I waited. I waited because I wanted the full web, not just the spider. That was a mistake. I should have cut him 3 weeks ago. I should have cut him years ago. He stood. He let go of her hand slowly, as if he had only just realized he had still been holding it, and he paced. 3 steps to the fire, 3 steps back. Listen to me, he said. Lyra, listen. She was listening. Voss said something to you tonight. I want to know what. I don't expect you to be able to tell me every word. Give me the shape of it. He came to you. He was not afraid of you. That tells me already that he knew what you were before he walked in. Yes? She nodded. Did he say he wanted to use you? She nodded. Did he say anything about me? She paused. She thought. She drew, with her finger in the air, a rough throne shape, the squat block back, the tall sides. Then she pointed at him, at Adric. Then she drew a line across her own throat. Then she pointed at Voss's invisible place in the air and tapped her chest, me. Then the throne shape again, with Voss's place beside it. Adric watched her hand. He read each gesture like a page. He wants me dead, he said. He wants you on the throne with him. She shook her head sharply. She tapped her chest. She made a small gesture with her hand, a tool gesture, a thing-in-the-hand gesture. Me, as a tool. Then she drew the throne again, tapped Voss's place. He wants you as his weapon, Adric said, not as his queen, as his instrument. Because what you have in your chest, he thinks he can aim. She nodded. Adric laughed. It was a real laugh, short, harsh, and real. He dragged a hand down his face. He thinks he can aim you, he said, half to himself. By the cold hells. He has no idea. He has absolutely no. He broke off, looked at her. Lyra, does he in fact have any idea? She looked at him a long moment. Then, slowly, she shook her head. No, Adric agreed, soft. No, he doesn't. He felt the shape of it. He didn't feel the size of it. He crossed back to her, crouched again. I felt the size of it, he said. The first night, in your tower. When I stood 3 feet from you and you kept it down. I have never. Lyra, listen to me. Look at me. I have never in my life stood next to something that frightened me. Not my father, not the men I killed to take this throne, not the priest I put in the ground. Nothing. I have never been afraid of a room I was in. And I stood in your room, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I had to leave.
Do you know why I left that night?
She did not know. Because if I had stayed another minute, I would have said something I couldn't unsay, and you would have. He gestured vaguely at her sternum. Done something you couldn't undo. I could feel it reaching for me, and I could feel you not letting it, and I thought, this is the most extraordinary thing in the frontier, and it is locked inside a girl who cannot speak, and somebody somewhere is going to try to pick the lock. He shook his head. I thought I had more time. Give me. There was a knock at the door. Quick, 3 taps, a pattern. Adric stood. Come. The bolt slid. Cale came in. His face was wrong. His face was the face of a man with information he did not want to deliver. My lord. Report. Cale's eyes flicked to Lyra, once, and back to the king. Adric made a small gesture with 2 fingers. She hears this. My lord, Voss is not in the fortress. Silence. What? He left by the south postern a little under an hour ago, alone, on horseback. He told the gate that he had been sent by you to carry a sealed order to Captain Meare's column at the forward camp. He had a writ. The writ had your seal on it. It did not have my seal on it. No, my lord, it had a seal. The gate captain is an old man, and it was dark, and the wax was. Cale's mouth worked. The wax was good enough. He let him through. Who was with Voss? No one, my lord. That's the other thing. He rode out alone. Adric's face had gone so still it looked carved. And Halleck? Lord Halleck is in the east wing, my lord. In his chambers, door locked from the inside. 2 men posted in the corridor, his own. When I asked one of them, he said Lord Halleck was unwell and had retired early. Unwell. His exact word, my lord. Adric was very quiet for a long moment. Then he said, almost conversationally, Cale, when Voss left, was he carrying anything? Cale hesitated. My lord, the gate captain said he was carrying a small thing, a vial, or a stoppered bottle. He had it in his left hand as he rode out, not concealed. The captain noticed it because Lord Voss fumbled it as he lifted the reins and almost dropped it and swore and then tucked it into his saddlebag. Adric's hand closed, slowly, on the edge of the table beside the couch. The wood creaked. Cale, go to the kitchens. Every cup of wine and every bowl of food that has left the kitchen tonight for this floor, my solar, my bedchamber, the small hall, find it. If it has been eaten, find out by who. If it has not been eaten, bring it to me. Nobody else opens any of it. Nobody else touches any of it. And Cale? My lord, wake Oda. If Oda is already awake, and I suspect she is, tell her Lady Diane stays with her tonight. In her room. Not in the East Tower. Not in any room in this fortress that can be entered from a corridor I have not personally walked. The lady does not leave Oda's side until I come for her. Do you understand me? Aye, my lord. Go. Cale went. The door closed. The bolt slid again, Adric himself this time, shooting it home. He did not turn back to her right away. He stood with his hand on the bolt and his forehead pressed to the wood, and for the first time since she had met him, his shoulders moved. A single long breath, in, out. Then he turned. He poisoned me, he said, quietly. Tonight, at some point, before Voss rode out of my gate, he poisoned me. She stood up. Her legs had come back to her. I don't feel it yet, Adric said, unhurried, almost clinical. That's the way he would have done it. Something slow. Something that would give him 3 days to get south, 4 if I was strong, to the Voss lands where Halleck's letters have been going for, he laughed once, without humor, for 10 months. He has been building a southern army in my name. Did I mention that? I don't think I mentioned that. He has bannermen who think they are being raised at my command. They will ride in my name until the day my body is found. And then they will ride in his name, and everyone will say how tragic, and nobody will ever dig up what happened in a sealed bottle tonight. He walked back to her. He was very calm. He was too calm. I am going to survive this, Lyra, he said. I will drink every antidote in the fortress, and I will ride at dawn, and I will eat him alive in front of his own banners. But I need you to understand something, in case his mouth tightened, in case I am wrong about how slow it is, in case it's not 3 days, in case it's 3 hours. He reached out, and this time he did touch her. He put his palm flat against the side of her face. His hand was warm, steady. If I go down tonight, he said, Halleck is the one who takes the hall, not Voss. Voss is the hammer. Halleck is the hand. Halleck will make the announcement. Halleck will produce... He closed his eyes, very briefly. Halleck will produce a story about a mute witch girl from a disgraced frontier house who came into my fortress and put her hand on my chest and something in her flared. And I was found dead, and she was found standing over me. That is the story he has been waiting for. That is the story Voss put in your room tonight to build. The blood on your lip. The time alone. Witnesses who will swear they saw him come out of your tower and heard you still moving inside. Do you see? She was crying. She had not known she was crying until she felt the wet on her cheek against his palm. She did not make a sound. She never made a sound, but her eyes were running, hot, and her shoulders had started to shake, and the thing in her chest was screaming again, and for the first time in 12 years she did not know if she could hold it. Don't, Adric said, softer than she had ever heard him. Don't let it out. Not here. Not for me. You hear me? Not for me. She pressed her forehead against his chest. He did not flinch. He put his arm around the back of her head, his other hand still against her cheek, and for a long moment the Alpha King of the frontier and the mute girl from a bloodline that had thrown her away stood in the middle of his solar with the fire burning low and the snow falling past the window, and neither of them moved, and neither of them spoke, because one of them could not, and one of them did not have the words. She could feel his heartbeat against her forehead. It was steady. It was very steady. Almost too steady. Too slow. Her head came up. Her hand came up too. Went, before she could think about it, to his throat. 2 fingers just below the angle of his jaw. She pressed. His pulse was there. But it was slow. It was too slow. She looked at him. His eyes were on hers, and they were still silver, still clear, still him. And then, for a half second, they were not. The silver slid, the way a wet plate slides under a fingertip, and came back. He did not fall. He did not stagger. But something in his face, some small muscle around the eye, dropped, the way a rope drops a hair when a knife nicks it. He felt her feel it. Ah, he said softly, with something like surprise. That was faster than I expected. His knees did not quite buckle. He reached, with one hand, to steady himself against the back of the couch. He missed the couch. His hand skidded on the fabric. He caught the couch on the second try. Lyra, he said, still quiet, still calm. Open the door. She shook her head, a useless, terrified shake. Open the door and call for Kale. Pound on it. You can pound hard. They will come. She was already moving. She shoved past him. She hit the bolt with both hands and shoved it back and hauled the door open, and she pounded on the stone beside it with the flat of her hand, again and again and again, the dull meat-on-stone sound of a woman with no voice calling for help in the only language she had. Behind her, at the edge of her vision, Adric's legs went out from under him. Not dramatically. He sat, hard, on the floor, with his back against the couch, one hand braced on the rug, the other pressed to his chest. "Kale!" she heard him call, and his voice was not loud, not the ringing command from the bailey. It was tired. It was a voice fraying at the edges. "Kale! Now!" Boots somewhere down the corridor, running. Lyra turned. She crossed back to him on legs that did not belong to her. She dropped to her knees beside him. He was smiling, small, lopsided, an awful smile, a smile that had no business being on his face.
Tell Kale,
He said, and his hand caught her wrist, and it was weaker than it had been 10 minutes ago, and she understood with a coldness she had never felt before that he was going to say something like a last instruction, and she was not going to be able to bear it, and in that exact instant, the thing in her chest rose. It rose the way water rises in a broken hull. Everywhere at once. It filled her from the soles of her feet to the roots of her hair, and the room got very bright and very quiet, and every flame in the solar she found, the fire in the hearth, the 2 candles on the desk, the 3 candles in the sconce above the couch, bent sideways, bent toward her, bent toward the dying king in her lap. She felt him feel it. His eyes, half-lidded, found hers. For a long second, he was not afraid. Then the door slammed open behind her, and Kale's voice was shouting something, and more boots, and a woman's voice.
Oda? She thought distantly.
Oda came running too.
And Lyra closed her eyes and pressed both hands flat against Adric Vale's chest where his heart was running down like a watch, and she made the oldest decision a living thing can make.
She let the cage open, just a crack, just enough to hold him in the world a little longer. And something in the solar, something in the bones of the fortress, something very old and very asleep, opened one eye inside her ribs and looked out through her hands and saw the poison in the Alpha King's blood, saw it the way you see a stain on white cloth. And Lyra Dane, mute daughter of a house that had never loved her, put her forehead down against his and did not, for the first time in her life, hold it back. It was not a wave. A wave would have been something she could describe later. This was quieter than a wave. It was the feeling of a long, long breath finally being let out. Her breath, or somebody else's, she could not tell which anymore. And when it moved through her, it did not move outward so much as into him, sinking through her palms into his chest, through the black wool of his shirt, through skin and bone, down to the dark of his blood. She saw it, not with her eyes. Her eyes were closed. She saw it the way a person sees a thing in a dream, absolute, specific, impossible to doubt, a thin dark thread running through him. Not black, green, the green of algae at the bottom of a well. It was coiled in his stomach. It had sent runners into his liver. It was crawling up through the big vessels toward his heart, and she could see it move. She could see the slow, wet pulse of it keeping pace with his pulse, settling, seeding itself deeper with every beat. She did not think about what she was doing. There was no part of her that knew how to think about what she was doing. She simply reached the way a drowning person reaches for a rope, and the thing inside her reached with her, not loose, not let out, but extended, a single careful finger uncurling from a fist, and she followed the green along the line of his vessels and began, gently, to pull. It came. It came reluctantly at first, like thread stuck in wet cloth, and then, as she found the end of it, it came in a long unraveling that made Adric's whole body jerk once under her hands. His back arched a quarter inch off the rug. His breath caught. For a terrible instant, she thought she had killed him. Then his breath came back, ragged but real, and the green came with it, up through him, out of him, into her. That was not something she had expected. She had not, in her half-formed panic, thought about where the poison would go. She had thought she was going to burn it, the way you burn a tick-off skin. She had thought it would be pulled out of him and hang in the air and drift away, like smoke. Instead, it came up her arms. She felt it enter her. It went in through her palms and up her wrists and up the long bones of her arms and across her collarbones. And it was cold. It was cold the way deep lake water is cold, the cold of a thing that has never known sun. It filled her chest and did not stop. It pushed up her throat. She gagged. Her head came up. She turned sideways so as not to be over him, and she threw up. It was not food. There was nothing in her stomach but the brandy he had given her, and the brandy was gone by the second heave. What came up after that was black. Not dark red, not bile. Black, in the way ink is black, and it splashed on the rug in a long, ugly ribbon, and it steamed faintly in the cold air of the solar. And when it hit the rug made a small hissing sound like a cat, and a pale ring of scorched wool spread out around it. Somebody was shouting.
Kael.
Kyle was shouting. Kale had been shouting for some time, she realized. He had one hand on her shoulder and one hand on Adric's chest, and he was giving orders at the top of his lungs. Physician, physician now. Someone fetch the old man. Someone fetch Oda. Someone bolt that outer door. Nobody else comes in this hall tonight. Move! And behind him, Oda had her hands over her mouth. And behind Oda, two of the king's own guards were standing with their swords half drawn and no idea what to point them at. Adric was still breathing. That was the first thing Lyra understood. His chest was moving, not deeply, not steadily, but moving, which was more than it had been doing 1 minute ago. His color had not come back. He was gray, and sweat had broken out along his hairline. But the awful stillness around his mouth had loosened. The muscles that had gone slack were twitching again. His eyes were closed. He was not dead. She had pulled enough. She had pulled the thread off the heart. The rest of it was still in him. She could feel it. She could feel every inch of it like a map drawn on the inside of her skin. But the worst of it, the forward wave, the part that had been crawling up toward the big vessels, that she had pulled, and that was now lying on the rug in a scorched black ribbon and eating a hole in Adric Vale's carpet. She wiped her mouth on the back of her wrist. The blood had come back on her lip, both nostrils this time, and there was a thin line of it on her chin, and her hands were shaking so badly she could not have held a cup if somebody had put one in them. But she was, mostly, still Lyra. The thing in her chest had not gone loose. It had unfolded one finger and put it back. It was watching her now, from its cage, the way a wolf watches a woman who has opened its door for 10 seconds and then shut it again. It had seen the outside. It remembered the outside. She was going to pay for that later. For now, she lifted her head. "He'll live," she heard herself think clearly. It was the first full sentence that had sounded in her own mind in 3 days. "He'll live. I bought him time. Somebody else has to do the rest." Kale was bent over the king, 2 fingers on his throat, counting. His eyes flicked up at her. "Lady," his voice was rough. It had been shouting. "Lady Dane, stay with me. Can you—" She shook her head. "Not can't. Don't have to." She lifted one shaking hand and pointed at the black ribbon on the rug. Then she pointed down at Adric's stomach. Then she held her hand out flat, palm down, an inch above his sternum, and shook it. More in there. Not all of it. Kale understood her faster than the king had. Kale was a soldier, and soldiers learned to read hands. Right, lady, I hear you." He looked over his shoulder. "Bryn, where in the cold hells is Master Varn?" "Coming, sir, he's coming." Oda went. "Get him here now, boy. I don't care if you have to carry the old man on your shoulders. Go." And Bryn went, boots pounding. Kale turned back to her. "Lady, listen to me. I'm going to move him. I'm going to get him off this floor and onto the couch. I need you to let go of him." She had not realized she was still holding on. Her hands were on Adric's chest, flat, both palms. She could not make the move. Kale saw that. He did not try to pry her loose. He set his own hand gently over the back of her right hand, and he said, "Lady, 1 finger at a time. Lift one, slow." She lifted one. "Good, the next." She lifted the next. He walked her off him finger by finger, the way a patient man talks a child off a ledge. And when her hands came away, they came away clean. No mark on the black wool of Adric's shirt, no scorch, nothing. Whatever the black stuff had been, it had not come out through her palms. It had come out through her mouth. That was going to matter, later. She filed it away. Kyle and one of the guards lifted Adric onto the couch. The guard was breathing hard by the time it was done, because a king is not a small man, and Adric's head lolled once against Kale's shoulder in a way that made everyone in the room flinch. Then they had him on the cushions, and Kale was loosening the neck of his shirt, and Oda was back. Oda had been gone and back, Lyra realized. She had fetched a basin and cloths, and Oda was in command of the couch now, the way Oda was in command of everything she stood close to. Footsteps in the corridor, heavier this time, uneven. An old man running. The door banged open and a small, wiry, white-haired man in a loose brown robe came in at a shuffle, clutching a worn leather bag and scowling at everyone. "Out of my way! Out! Out of my way! What happened? When? What has he eaten? What has he drunk? Who was with him? Out of my way, Kale, you great log. I can't see past you." "Poison," Kale said. "We think,
Of course, poison. I can smell it from the door. What kind? What color? Was it in the cup or on the cup? Where is the cup? We don't know yet, master. The cup is... Cale gestured at the sideboard, at the clay jug, at the cup that had held the brandy Adric had poured for Lyra. We think not that. I drank from that jug an hour ago. I'm standing. There are cups in the kitchen where... Quiet, quiet. Let me look at him. Master Varn, he had to be Master Varn, the old physician, set his bag on the floor, climbed up onto the edge of the couch with the terrible ease of a man who had been climbing onto beds to save kings since before Cale was born, and put his hands on Adric's face, pulled back an eyelid, looked at the white, grunted, put 2 fingers to the throat, counted, grunted again, lifted Adric's hand and looked at the nail beds. Then he saw the black ribbon on the rug. He went very still. Who did that? Nobody answered. Everyone looked at Lyra. Master Varn turned his head. He looked at Lyra for a long, long moment. His eyes were the watery pale of an old man's eyes, and they did not blink. She could not read them. You, he said. Not a question. She nodded. Come here, closer, to the light. She went. Her legs worked, just. Oda caught her elbow and steered her the last step. The old man took her chin between a thumb and a forefinger. He turned her head. He looked in her left eye, then her right. He pulled down her lower lid. He grunted again, but it was a different grunt. He let go of her chin and took her hand, the right, the one that had been on Adric's sternum, and turned it palm up and pressed his own thumb into the center of it. She made a small sound. Not voiced, just a breath out. It hurt. It hurt as if he had pressed into a bruise. Master Varn said. He let go of her hand. Cale, he said, not taking his eyes off Lyra. Master. How long ago did she do whatever she did? To him. 4 minutes. 5. And the king was where before he collapsed? With me in the bailey for the muster. He was... Cale's voice caught slightly. He was fine. He gave orders. He walked in under his own power. He took a cup of something here. He gave it to her. She drank first, then... No, he didn't drink from it. Did he eat anything in the bailey? No. Drink anything. Cale paused. A flask. Captain Mear's flask. Mear offered it. My lord took a pull. It's a standard flask, master. It's been in Mear's belt for 15 years. I've drunk from it myself not 2 weeks ago. Yes, but did Mear drink from it tonight? Silence. Cale's face changed. Mear offered. My lord drank. Mear never. He closed his eyes. Mear never lifted the flask to his own mouth. He handed it over. My lord drank. My lord gave it back. Mear put it away. Master, I was standing right there. Then somebody got to Mear's flask, Master Varn said. Or somebody got to Mear. Send a man. Quietly. Quietly, Cale. I am not asking twice. I want Captain Mear and I want him calm. I do not want him dead or warned. Cale snapped 2 fingers at the younger guard, who went. Master Varn looked back at Lyra. Lady Dane, I am going to ask you some questions. You will answer yes or no. Can you do that? She nodded. Was that... He pointed at the black ribbon. In him, until you touched him. She nodded. You pulled it. She nodded. Through your hands. She nodded. And out through your mouth. She nodded. Where did it go before your mouth? Did it go through your chest? She hesitated. Then she nodded. Ah, he said softly. Yes, of course it did. Of course. He muttered that a little more. He turned to his bag, knelt beside it, his old knees cracked audibly, and began rummaging in it. He pulled out a small green glass bottle, pulled the stopper, sniffed it, grunted. Oda, warm water, half a cup. Now. Coming, master. Lady Dane. He did not turn to her. He was mixing something in a small pewter cup, crushing something with the butt of a knife. I'm not going to pretend I know what you are. You can tell me later when I have time to argue with it. For now, I have a more pressing concern. When you pulled that, he jerked his chin at the rug, out of my king, you did not destroy it.
You moved it. Some of it is on the rug. Some of it, I very strongly suspect, is in you. You are bleeding from the nose. Your pupils are unequal, and the skin of your palm is hot enough to feel through my thumb. So, I'm going to give you something to drink. It is going to taste terrible. You are going to drink all of it. Am I being clear?" She nodded. Oda came back with the water. Master Varn mixed, muttered, mixed again. He held the cup to Lyra's mouth. "Open. All of it. No sipping." She drank. He had not been lying. It tasted like bark and old metal and something faintly rotten, and it went down in a single gulp that made her eyes water. She gagged. He clamped his free hand over her mouth. "No, keep it down, keep it down. Breathe through your nose, slow, slow. Good girl, good girl." The warmth came fast. It spread out from her stomach in a way the poison cold had not, filling her from the inside, and she felt the coiled something that had gotten into her chest loosen. Not leave. She did not think it was going to leave, not all of it, but loosen. Step back from whatever edge it had been sitting on. Master Varn watched her face. "There," he said. "That's better. Color's coming back. Eyes are... Yes, yes, good. Sit down, lady, before you drop." Oda had a stool for her. She sat. The room swam once, hard, and then settled. Master Varn turned back to the king. "He's breathing better," he said, almost to himself. "Heart's stronger. Color's still bad. He'll sleep it off, what's left. The rest," he tapped the rug near the black ribbon with the toe of his boot, "will burn. Not on the rug. Kale, cut that section out. Cut it out. Don't touch it. Use the knife on your hip and use the edge you don't favor. Wrap it in something that isn't wool. Burn it in the forge fire, not the hearth. Go on? Go." Kael went to work with his knife. A square of rug came up in his hands, and the guard produced a leather saddlebag from somewhere, and the black ribbon vanished inside, and the whole package was carried out of the solar between two men at arm's length. Lyra breathed. She breathed the way a person breathes who has been holding her breath for a long time, and she did not cry, because she had done her crying upstairs earlier, but her chest shook, and Oda, without a word, sat down on the floor beside her stool and put an arm around her knees and squeezed once, briefly, and let go. After a long while, Master Varn came to her again. "He'll sleep till dawn," the old man said. "Maybe past dawn. When he wakes, he'll be weak. Weak for days. He won't like it. He'll want to ride. He won't be able to ride, not as hard as he'll want to, and he'll take it out on the man closest to him. The man closest to him tonight will be Kyle, which is a mercy, because Kale can take it. If you are close to him, lady, he will not take it out on you, in case you were worried about that." She had not been, but she was grateful in a distant way that he had bothered to say it. "Now," Master Varn said, and his pale eyes fixed on hers, "you and we are going to have one small understanding tonight, and then I am going to let you sleep. Look at me." She was looking. "I have been a physician in this fortress for 38 years. I saw the king's father die. I saw the king's mother die. I have seen 3 of this king's wives die. 2 in childbed, 1 of a sickness I do not understand to this day. I have seen many strange things, and I am not a man who is easily surprised. And tonight, in this room, you surprised me." She did not react. "I am not a man," he said, "who will go to the court tomorrow and say the Dain girl is a witch. I am not a man who will whisper in the halls. I have known this king since he was 8 years old, and I held his hand through a fever. I am his man, and as his man, I will say to you one thing, lady, and I would like you to hear it." She waited. "Whatever you are," Master Varn said, "whatever lives under your hand, whatever came up out of your mouth onto that rug, it belongs now to the man on that couch. Do you understand me? Not because he owns it. He does not own it. Because you put it in him tonight, and then you pulled it out of him tonight. And what you put in does not unmake, and what comes back out is tied. I do not have the books to tell you how. I know it is true because I have seen it twice before, a very long time ago, in very small ways, and this..." His old hand gestured at the couch, at the king, at the square of missing rug. This was not a small way. He leaned closer. "You cannot leave him now, lady. He cannot leave you. Whatever was between you last night, whatever he thought this was, That part of the question is over. Something else has begun. I do not know what. I suspect you do not know either, but it has begun, and the men in this fortress will, in time, smell it on you both, and the men who mean you harm will smell it fastest. Do you understand? She nodded, slow. Good. Now sleep. She did not sleep in the solar. Oda took her with Kale personally walking behind them the whole way to a small room 2 floors up, a plain chamber in the wing where the senior servant slept, with a narrow bed and a washstand and a single locked window and a door that Kale himself checked the bolt on 3 times. Oda lit a candle. Oda brought her water. Oda took off her slippers and put her own shawl on the back of the door and sat in the chair in the corner with her arms crossed and a knife, a small, practical knife, a kitchen knife, across her lap. Sleep, girl, Oda said. You're safe in this room. Kale has put 8 of his own men on the corridor. If somebody tries for this door tonight, they go through 4 men before they get to it, and they go through me after that. Sleep. Lyra lay on her back on the narrow bed. She did not expect to sleep. She closed her eyes and expected to watch the black ribbon behind her eyelids for the rest of the night. Instead, somewhere between one breath and the next, she was gone. Gone. She woke to a gray dawn and Oda already up, moving quietly around the washstand. There's Halleck news, Oda said without turning. I'll tell you when you've eaten. Lyra sat up. Her head did not spin. That was surprising. Her mouth tasted of the bark and metal drink from the night before. But she could move her fingers and her toes, and her hands did not shake when she lifted them. The thing in her chest was quiet. Not asleep. She did not think it was going to be asleep again, ever. Not quite the way it had been, but quiet. It had gotten what it wanted in the shape of the taste it had had, and it was pacing now inside its cage. And the cage still held. She stood. Oda put a cup of something hot in her hand and a piece of bread, and did not speak until she had eaten both. Right, Oda said. Here's the news. Because Kale came by an hour ago. The king is awake. He's conscious. He's grouchy. He tried to stand up and Master Varn tried to push him back down, and there was a small argument in which both men used language my mother would have whipped me for. And in the end, the king is still in bed because Master Varn is a small man, but a terrifying one. Point is, he's alive and he's himself. Lyra let out a breath she had not known she was holding. Captain Mir, Oda went on, was found at the 2nd hour past midnight in his own quarters, with his throat cut. Neat cut, professional. He had been dead about an hour when Kale's man found him. His flask was missing. Lyra set the bread down. So, Oda said, whoever poisoned the flask also cleaned up the flask, and the man who carried the flask, because a dead man carrying a dead flask is a closed book. That was done while the king was in this fortress, which means the person who did it was in this fortress when they did it, which means it was not Voss. Voss was gone by then. So, somebody else. Somebody who stayed behind. Lyra looked at her. Lyra. Yes, Oda said. Exactly. That's the same face I made, girl. Now. Halleck. Lord Halleck spent the night in his chambers. Door locked. 2 of his own men at the door, unwell. He emerged at first light this morning. He emerged loudly. He is, according to 3 separate servants I have spoken with, telling anyone who will listen that a terrible thing has happened in the night, that the king has been struck down by a cowardly poisoning. He has the story already, Lyra. He has the whole story already. And that by his inquiries, it appears a certain guest of the household was in suspicious circumstances yesterday evening and must be questioned. Strenuously questioned was the word his chamberlain used. He is, at this moment, downstairs with 6 of his own men. He is asking where you are. Lyra's stomach turned over. Once. Hard. Kale, Oda said, has not told him. Kale has said the Dain girl is unwell and confined to her tower. The Dain girl is, of course, not in her tower. She is in my room. But Halleck is going to demand to go to the tower. He is going to demand it in front of as many men of the household as he can gather in the Great Hall. He is going to make it a public matter. Because if it is a private matter, the king can make it go away. If it is a public matter, Oda's mouth was tight. If it is a public matter, he is betting that the king is either too weak or too dead to stop him. Lyra looked at her hand. It was not shaking. That was interesting.
Kale is coming up in a quarter of an hour to take you to the king. Before that, I am to dress you. Not in gray, the king's word, in black. A proper dress. He has sent one up from, I don't know where he got it, frankly, it may have been his mother's, but it is on the chair behind the door and it fits. I checked, so don't give me an argument about it. Lyra turned. There was a dress on the chair behind the door. Heavy black wool, plain cut, a high collar, long sleeves. Not a gown, not a bride's dress, not anything soft or pleading. A dress a woman wore when she was going to stand in a hall and not flinch. She looked at it a long moment. Then she looked at Oda, and she could not help it. She did not even try to. She smiled. A small, crooked, real smile. The first one in days. Oda snorted. Yes, I thought you'd like it. Come, arms up. But the walk to the king's chamber was short and quiet and bristling with men. Kale did not speak to her on the way. He did not need to. He walked half a step ahead of her, one hand resting on the hilt of his sword, and the 6 guards with them fell in at a distance so practiced Lyra realized they must have drilled it for exactly this purpose, moving a person through the fortress without being seen to be guarded. They used the back stairs. They used a corridor she had not known existed, behind the wall of the small hall. They came out into a short passage lined with tapestries and a single oak door. Kale knocked. 2 taps. A pause. 1 tap. The door opened from inside. The king's bedchamber was warmer than she had expected. A fire. A carved bed bigger than her whole room at her father's house. Heavy curtains pulled back on 3 sides. Adric was propped up against pillows, sitting rather than lying, dressed in a loose dark robe that Master Varn clearly had fought him into. His color was bad, pale, with a gray under it, but his eyes were clear, more than clear. His eyes, when they found her across the room, were sharp, the kind of sharpness a blade has when it has been put through fire and is still hot. Master Varn was on the bed's far side, frowning into a small cup. Another man she didn't know, a clerk, she thought, by the ink stains on his fingers, stood at a small writing table by the window with a stack of parchment in front of him. "Come here," Adric said. His voice was rough, not weak. Rough. The rough of a man whose throat had been through something. She crossed the room to the side of the bed. Kale stayed by the door. Adric looked at her a long moment. "You look good in black," he said. She almost laughed. She did not quite, but the corner of her mouth moved and he saw it, and something in his face, something that had been wound very tight since last night, loosened a quarter turn. "I am not going to thank you," he said. "Thanking you would be an insult. A man thanks a servant. A man does not thank the thing that kept him breathing. I will only say that I know, and I will remember, and there is a long list in this fortress of people who have saved my life, and a very short list of people I have allowed to put their hand on my chest. And as of last night, you are the only name on the second list. Do you understand?" She nodded. "Good. Now listen. I don't have much time. Varn says I will have the strength to walk across a room and do it well, once, today, and then I will collapse, so we are going to use that walk well. Halleck is downstairs. He is asking for you. He is going to have me declared unfit by the noon bell if I don't stop him, and he is going to stop me by means of you. We are not going to let him." She waited. "We are going to go down to the hall together," Adric said. "I am going to walk. You are going to walk beside me. You are going to walk beside me as—" He paused, the smallest beat, "as my chosen, not my bride. I will not lie to the hall about a ceremony we have not had, but as the woman I have named under my hand, with witnesses, and to whom I owe my life under Master Varn's testimony, which makes you, Lyra, something neither Halleck nor Voss has a name for, which is exactly what I want you to be. A thing without a name is a thing without a law, and a thing without a law cannot be tried by a steward in an hour." She nodded slowly. "I'm going to tell the hall what happened. I'm going to tell them about the flask. I'm going to tell them about Voss. I'm going to let Halleck speak, if he wants to speak, and when he speaks he will dig his own grave deeper than I could dig it for him, because Halleck does not know yet that Captain Mir is dead. He will accuse. And when he accuses, Kale will walk into the hall with the square of rug from my solar, wrapped in oilcloth, and Master Varn will testify to what was on that rug,
and the whole shape of what Halleck has been preparing for weeks will fall sideways in front of his own men.
He paused. "It will work," he said, "because they have not seen me upright yet today. They do not know I am standing. They do not know you are standing next to me. When we walk into that hall, they will— He gave her the thinnest edge of a smile. "They will contract, Lyra. Every man in that hall will contract. That's the moment. That is the only moment I have." She looked at him for a long time, Then she lifted her hand and laid it lightly over his where it rested on the bedclothes. She did not squeeze. She set it there, the way he had set his over hers in the solar. She met his eyes, and with the thumb of her free hand, very slowly, very deliberately, she tapped her own chest. Once. "I'll do it." Adric closed his eyes for just a second. When he opened them, he said, "Only right," and swung his legs off the bed. Master Varn hissed, "My lord." "Don't, Varn. Don't start. Help me up." The great hall was full, not by accident. Halleck had filled it. He had sent for bannermen who happened to be in the fortress. He had sent for the steward of the household. He had sent for the chamberlain and 2 of the senior captains. He had sent for 3 junior lords who owed him money and whose fathers owed him more. He had even sent for Lord Thornwick, whose daughter Lyra had last seen shivering in the courtyard her first morning, and who had presumably stayed on in the fortress as a guest to see what came next. They were all there. 40 men, maybe, plus servants along the walls, heads down, pretending not to listen and listening harder than anyone. Halleck himself stood at the foot of the dais. He was dressed in a somber dark gray, and his face was arranged in the careful, noble sadness of a man preparing to deliver news he did not want to deliver. Beside him stood his own captain, a brutal-faced man with a hand resting very casually on his belt near his sword. Halleck was in the middle of a sentence. "Must therefore ask with a heavy heart that we summon," when the great doors at the back of the hall opened. They opened slowly, because Adric Vale was walking through them under his own power, and Lyra had quickly understood in the corridor, approximately 1 slow walk left in him. He had his left hand at his side and his right hand resting lightly on her forearm, as if he were escorting her and not leaning on her. The lean was there, underneath. She could feel every pound of it. He was a stone building on a single stick. She did not let her arm tremble. She would not let her arm tremble if it killed her. The hall contracted. Every man in the room did exactly what Adric had said they would do. They pulled in. Shoulders up, chins in, breath caught. Halleck's mouth, which had been open on the word summon, stayed open on the word summon. The captain beside him took a half-step back before he knew he had moved. Adric did not speak at first. He walked. He walked the length of the hall, with Lyra at his right and Cale 1 pace behind his left shoulder, and Master Varn behind Cale, and 2 guards behind Master Varn, and he did not stop until he was at the foot of the dais with Halleck. "Ren," he said. Halleck swallowed. "Your Grace." "I hear," Adric said conversationally, "that you have been worried about my health." "Your Grace, I was told you were—" "I was," Adric said. "You may ask Master Varn. He will tell you I was very nearly a corpse on a carpet. You may be sad to hear I am not. You may be sad in particular to hear why I am not." Halleck's face went a particular shade. Not red. The opposite of red. A cold, milky color, the color a face goes when the blood decides it is needed elsewhere. "Your Grace, I don't—" "Lady Dane." Adric did not take his eyes off Halleck. "Step forward." She stepped forward. Not far. Half a pace. Enough to be seen. She kept her hand under his arm for show, and also because he needed it. She kept her eyes on Halleck's eyes, and she did not blink. "This is the woman," Adric said, quiet, carrying, "whose hand was on my chest last night when your flask did what it was sent to do. This is the woman who pulled your poison out of me. This is the woman you were, 15 minutes ago, preparing to accuse in this hall, in front of these men, of doing to me exactly what you did. Cale." "My lord." "Bring the rug," Kyle signaled. One of the guards behind Master Varn stepped forward with a heavy bundle of oilcloth. He unwrapped it at the foot of the dais. The square of carpet came out, the scorched ring,
the faint black residue, the stink of it, sharp and foul, rising immediately through the warm air of the hall. 40 men recoiled at once. "Master Varn," Adric said, "tell the hall what came up out of me last night." Master Varn took one step forward. His small, old voice was remarkably clear. "A compound," he said. "I have made it my business to know many. I have never made it my business to use this one, and I hope never to. In the southern provinces, in unlicensed apothecaries, among men who do not often live long enough to write their names in ledgers, it is called the green thread. It is distilled from a root that grows in one valley only, and the valley is in the southern hills. It is the trade poison of Lord Cassian Voss's holdings. It has been for 3 generations. A man who uses it is a man who is either Voss or in Voss's purse. There is," he said mildly, "no third option." Silence fell like a stone down a well. Adric turned very slowly to Halleck. Halleck was not looking at him. Halleck was looking at the black square on the floor. Halleck's mouth had gone through 3 shapes in the last 30 seconds and was now flat and working, and his hand, Lyra saw, had begun to close and open at his side. "Captain Mir," Adric said, "was found dead in his quarters at the 2nd hour past midnight. The flask he carried, which I drank from in your presence yesterday afternoon, is missing. The men Captain Mir placed at his door at dusk were, when questioned this morning, men who had been reassigned to that post at your suggestion. Wren. Your suggestion, recorded by my clerk on parchment 6 days ago. Because you said, and I quote, 'Mir is an old friend, and I would feel easier if his guard were chosen from men I know.'" Halleck opened his mouth. He did not speak. "Lord Voss," Adric went on, as calmly as if he were asking a steward the time, "rode out of my south postern last night bearing a writ with a forged seal. He is currently writing for his own lands, where he believes he is going to find a southern army raised in his name on letters signed in your hand, Wren, over the last 10 months. Those letters are at this moment being read by Master Varn's apprentices in my West Solar, because Kale has had them in a locked chest under my desk for 6 weeks. I did not open them. I wanted you to keep writing them. I hope you understand that compliment, Wren, because it is the last one I am going to pay you." Halleck's hand was on his hilt. His captain moved. Half a step. A hand toward his own. Kale drew first. It was not even fast. It was simply first. His blade came up across the captain's throat without touching it, a finger breadth from the skin, and Kale said, very conversationally, "Don't, Marek. I like you. Don't." Marek did not move. Halleck looked at his hand on his hilt as if it were a stranger's hand. He lifted it, very, very slowly, away. He held both hands out to the sides, palms open. "Your Grace," he said, and his voice was steady. Lyra had to give him that. Lord Wren Halleck was not going to weep in a hall in front of 40 men. I don't want your words," Adric said. "I want your sword." Halleck unbuckled his belt. He laid it on the floor in front of the dais, with the sword still in it, and he did not quite kneel, but he bent at the waist, low, and then he straightened. His face was the color of milk still. He did not look at anyone in the hall. He did not look at Lyra. "Kale," Adric said, "take him to the lower cells, alone. Men you trust. He speaks to no one until I send for him. Marek also. And then take 10 riders and go after Voss. Not to catch him, just to see that he rides in the direction I want him to ride. I want him to reach his lands. I want him to reach his lands and raise his flag and find out, very publicly, that no one is coming. Then I will have him. But not before. Aye, my lord." It was done in under a minute. Halleck went between 2 men, head up, mouth tight. Marek went between 2 more. The square of rug was rewrapped in its oilcloth and carried out. The hall stood in a kind of stunned silence. 40 men who had, 30 minutes earlier, been ready to hear a story about a witch girl and a poisoned king, and who had instead been shown a different story, a truer story, by a pale king on a pale girl's arm. Adric turned, slowly, to face them. "Lords of my house," he said. The roughness in his voice for a moment was not weakness. It was texture. It was the sound of a man who had come back through a door he should not have come back through. You have seen this morning a man betray me, and you have seen me named by a woman who cannot name herself. I will not ask you today to swear to her. I will not ask you today to understand her. I only ask you today to go back to your halls and your holdings and your men. And when anyone asks you what you saw here today, you will say, I saw the king stand. I saw a Dain girl in black at his right hand. I saw Ren Halleck on his knees, and that is all you will say. He paused. His breath, she realized, had gone shallow. Go. They went, not all at once. In the ragged, unwilling, fascinated way men leave a hall after the kind of thing no one is going to forget. Lord Thornwick was the last out, and as he passed the foot of the dais, he did something Lyra did not expect. He stopped. He looked at her. He looked at her for a long second, and then he inclined his head, a small, stiff, reluctant bow, the kind of bow a man gives because his body has decided to give it before he has. And he went. The doors closed. Adric's weight came down on her arm. It was sudden. He had held it back for 40 minutes, and he had held it back beautifully, and the doors were not quite shut before his knees went. She did not let him fall. She couldn't have supported him alone. He was too heavy and she was too thin. But Cale was already there on his other side, and between them they lowered him to the step at the foot of the dais, and Master Varn was muttering and already halfway through his bag, and somebody had run for water. Adric sat on the step, with his back against the carved wood, and his head tipped back and his eyes closed, and he was breathing like a man who had just run up a mountain. Varn, he said, eyes still closed. My lord. Tell me I was upright long enough. You were, my lord. Good. He opened his eyes. He did not look at Master Varn. He looked at Lyra, who was kneeling on the step next to him, her hand still on his forearm where she had kept it the whole walk. You didn't flinch, he said. Soft. A private joke. Hers. She shook her head. No, I didn't. Good girl. The hall was almost empty. A few guards along the walls. Oda, who had come in at some point without Lyra noticing and was standing by a pillar with her arms crossed and her eyes wet. The clerk with the ink-stained fingers, writing very fast at a small table near the dais, making a record of a morning that was going to be talked about in this fortress for a generation. At the back of the hall, one of the older bannermen, a man she had not known, thick-bearded, heavy-faced, the kind of man who had ridden with Adric's father, had not left with the others. He had stopped halfway to the door. Now he turned, slowly, and walked back up the hall, and when he reached the foot of the dais, he did not look at Adric. He looked at Lyra. He went down on one knee. Not a courtier's knee, not the little quick drop of the formal bow. A full knee, hard, the way an old soldier goes down when he means it, with his hand flat on his own thigh and his head bent. Lady, he said. Rough voice. Older than Master Varn's, rougher. Halvard of the North marches. My king lives because of your hand. When you have need of a sword on the north border, you will send, and I will come. He rose, stiffly. His knee cracked on the way up. He did not look at anyone else. He turned, and he walked out of the hall, and the great doors closed behind him with a sound that was not quite an echo. Lyra knelt on the step beside the king who had just used her to unmake his oldest traitor, and she did not cry, and she did not smile, but somewhere very deep in her, beneath the thing that was pacing in its cage, and beneath the exhaustion that was pulling at her bones, a single, small, warm place had opened. For 19 years she had walked into rooms and been looked past. An old soldier she did not know had just walked across a hall, gone down on one knee in front of her, and called her lady in a voice that meant it. She closed her hand very lightly around Adric's wrist where it rested on his thigh. He turned his hand over, palm up, without opening his eyes, and let her hold it. They did not get to keep the quiet. She held his hand on the step of the dais for perhaps a minute, perhaps two, long enough for his breath to settle. Long enough for Master Varn to cluck and push a small cup of something bitter against his mouth. Long enough for the clerk at the small table to fill one page and start another. And then a boot, heavy, running, came up the corridor outside the hall, and the doors banged open for the third time that morning, and a young rider in a mud-splashed leathers skidded to a stop halfway down the hall and went down on one knee so fast he nearly fell. My lord King, get up, Adric said. His eyes were closed again.
Come here. Don't make me open my eyes for you, son. I'm saving them. The rider came. He was young, younger than Cale, 17 maybe. He had been crying recently and had stopped, and his face had the streaky red look of a boy who was not going to cry again in front of the king, even if the king was sitting on a step. Report.
My lord, I ride from Halvard's relay, the south road. I was stationed at the Bruise Gate post. The boy's words were tripping over each other. He steadied them. My lord, Lord Voss did not ride to his lands. Adric's eyes opened. Say that again. He turned south and east, my lord. He rode past the fork. He did not take the Southern Hills road. He rode for Thornwick. Thornwick. My lord? Yes. The post at the fork saw him, tracked him to the second way station. Confirmed. Lord Voss is riding, with no fewer than 20 men he picked up at the way station. Men who were waiting for him, my lord. They were billeted there as if for a hunt. He is riding with those 20 men for the keep of Lord Thornwick. Adric sat forward. He should not have sat forward. Master Varn hissed and caught his shoulder. Adric shook him off without looking. Thornwick, Adric said. Not his own lands. Thornwick. My lord, yes. At the back of the hall, the doors had not fully closed after the boy, and at this moment a second figure stepped into them. Not running, but not calm. Lord Thornwick himself. He had not left the fortress after all. He had been, Lyra realized now, in the outer hall when the boy's report came in, and had followed the boy up, and had heard the word Thornwick from his own lungs' distance. His face was the face of a man who had not been expecting to hear his own name in that sentence. Your Grace, he began. Adric looked at him. The king's eyes were slow, but the cold in them was not slow at all. Lord Thornwick, your daughter is still a guest of this fortress, is she not? Thornwick's face changed again. He understood what Adric was saying before Adric finished the sentence. My lord. His hand went to his chest, palm flat, the old oath gesture of the border houses. My lord, upon my name, upon my hand, I have not. I have not. I have not written to Voss. I have not taken Voss's coin. I have not. My daughter has not. I swear it, your grace. I will swear it on the edge of any blade in this fortress. I believe you, Adric said. Calm down. I believe you, Thornwick. I've had Cale's eyes on your house for 2 years. You are not in this. Thornwick sagged. He did not quite go to his knee, but he put a hand on a pillar. But if Voss is riding for your keep, Adric said, it is because someone inside your keep has told him he will be welcome. You may not know who. You will need to find out. And you will need to find out before he gets there, because he will be there in, He looked at the boy. 4 days, my lord. 3 if he rides the horses bad. In 3 days, which is about 2.5 more days than my body is going to give me. Adric set his jaw. Thornwick, send your fastest man ahead. Name the most trusted. Tell your wife to close the inner gate and to admit no one she did not birth or bed. Tell her to hold. I will come. My lord, you can't. I will come. My lord, forgive me. Look at yourself. I will come, Thornwick. Thornwick shut up. Master Varn did not. My lord, the old physician said, in a voice that was quiet and terrible, if you put yourself on a horse in the next 3 days, you will die on the horse. I will not mince this for you. I will not soften it. You have been bled thin from the inside. Your heart is running on a spit string, one hard ride and the string parts. I am telling you this as your physician of 38 years, and I am telling you this as the man who held your hand through a fever when you were 8 years old, and I am telling you, you cannot ride. Silence. Adric's hand, still in Lyra's, tightened. She did not let go. She did not move. She understood suddenly, with a kind of cold, clear calm, the only person in this hall he was not going to try to command. He would command Varn. He would command Kyle. He would command Thornwick. He would not command her. He could not. Her silence was above his voice, so she used it. She lifted his hand. She turned it over. She pressed 2 fingers into the hollow of his wrist where the pulse was. She held them there. She looked at him. His pulse was doing what Varn said it was doing. She could feel it. It was not a king's pulse. It was the pulse of a string worn thin. She shook her head. Once. Lyra. She shook her head again. Harder. She tapped her own chest. Then she pointed at him. Then she made the small reining in gesture she had made twice already in the last 2 days. The two hands together, the slight closing motion, the hold. You stay. I go. He stared at her. No, he said, instantly, flat. Absolutely not, no. She did not blink. No, he said again, quieter. The voice of a man understanding he was about to lose an argument he had only just realized he was in. Lyra, no, you have no idea what you would be walking into. Thornwick's keep, if it falls to Voss, will be a nest. It will be full of his men. It will be, you don't know those roads, you don't know those men, you don't. She let go of his wrist. She did not stand. She stayed on the step beside him. She took his hand in both of hers and she laid it flat against her own chest, over her sternum, the way he had laid his hand there in his solar the night before. She held it there. Under his palm, she let the thing in her chest come up. Just a fraction, just enough that he would feel it. Not the way he had felt it that first night, not the terrible pressure of a held creature, but the size of it, the scope of it, the sense of a country pressed against a single door. She held it for one long second, then she pressed it back down, neat and careful. His eyes had gone very wide. Lyra, he said under his breath, that is not, she nodded. Yes, that is what goes. But, she shook her head. She pressed his hand down once more against her chest, firmly. That goes, not you. I am the thing that goes. Master Varn, from the other side of the king, said quietly, She is right, my lord. Adric turned his head, slowly, to look at him. You're going to hate me for saying it, Master Varn said. You are going to remember I said it, and you are going to find ways to make me sorry for the rest of my small life. But she is right. You cannot ride. She can. And she is... The old man hesitated, looking for the word. She is the one thing in this fortress that Lord Voss has already been frightened of, and he does not yet know how frightened he should be. If you want him ended at Thornwick, before he finds another house to turn and another flask to poison, you send the thing he fears. You do not send a sick man on a horse. Varn, my lord, I have been wrong about many things in 38 years. I have never been wrong about your heart. Your heart cannot make that road. Hers can. Adric closed his eyes. He did not open them for a long while. When he did, he looked at Lyra, only at her. Tell me, he said, very low, that you understand what I am letting you do. She nodded. Tell me, he said, that you understand that if I let you do this and you do not come back, the rest of my life is going to be a corridor I walk without you at the end of it. She looked at him. She took his hand off her chest. She turned his palm up. She pressed her thumb very gently into the center of it, the way Master Varn had pressed his thumb into hers the night before. She looked at him as she did it. I come back. He let out a breath that was not quite a laugh. Right, he said. Right. All right, Kale. Kale stepped forward. 30 men. Your best. Halvard's 12 if he is still in the courtyard, which he is. He would not leave a fortress where his knee has just been on the floor. He is sitting on the steps waiting to be useful. Your own 18. Master Varn will give you a rider. He looked at Varn, the apprentice, the one with the steady hands, not the young one who faints. Yes, my lord. She rides at the head of the column with Halvard on her right and you on her left. She is not to be called Dain on the road. Do not use her name. The column is riding to reinforce Thornwick at the king's request, nothing more. You will not explain her. If anyone asks, she is a physician's daughter sent for a sick lady of Thornwick's house. Is that clear? Aye, my lord. She is not to ride at the front of any engagement. If Voss reaches Thornwick before you do, you hold outside the walls. You do not go in. You send word. If he has taken the keep, you wait for her word on how to move. Hers, not yours. He looked at Kale hard. Kale, I know you. I know what you will want to do. You will see a chance to take the man, and you will want to take it. You will not take it. You will wait for her. Tell me you will wait for her. I will wait for her, my lord. Good. He turned back to Lara. I am giving you, he said, the 31 best men in this fortress, and I am giving you the authority of my name, and I am giving you. His voice dropped, went rough, went the rough that wasn't weakness. I am giving you 3 days, Lyra. 3 days. If you are not back in 3 days, I will come for you. Varn will argue with me. Varn will lose. I will come. On a horse. If it kills me. Do you understand? She nodded. Say it. She almost smiled. She could not say it. He knew she could not say it. It was the cruelest thing he had ever asked her, and the most human thing, because he was not asking for words. He was asking for the thing under the words. She lifted his hand one more time, and she pressed it, open, against her own cheek, and she held it there for a count of 3 and turned her face into his palm and closed her eyes. He swallowed, hard. All right, he said. Go, Hunter. She rode out of the Black Fortress 2 hours past noon. It was still snowing. The snow had not stopped in days. Not really. It would slow and then start again, and each new layer tamped the last one down until the world outside the walls was a flat, blue-white stretch of unmarked country. The 31 men of her column rode in double file behind her, cloaks dark against the pale road, Halvard at her right and Kyle at her left, exactly as Adric had ordered. And when the gates opened, the cold came in off the plain and hit her full in the face and made her eyes water, and she did not flinch. She had never sat a horse for longer than an hour. Halvard had chosen her mount himself, a squat, sturdy, ugly little mare of the North breed, patient and sure-footed, the kind of horse, he said gruffly, that would not die under her. He had shown her, in the courtyard, how to hold the reins, how to sit into the trot, how to relax her knees. Cale had watched this instruction and said nothing, and then, as Halvard turned to his own saddle, had leaned in and said under his breath, Lady, if you are half as good on a horse tonight as you were standing in that hall this morning, we will be fine. But sat li samnetbachesmit. She had looked at him. He had almost smiled. If you are worse, he had added, we will still be fine. I have a rope. She had snorted. An actual, audible breath, the closest thing to a laugh she had made in days. It had surprised her. It had surprised him. He had grinned openly, like a boy, and then caught himself and gone back to being Kyle. Now she rode at the head of the column, with the bruise behind her and the snow ahead and the road south, and she was tired in a way she had never been tired, and her thighs ached from the saddle already, and they had been riding less than an hour, and inside her chest the thing was awake. It had not gone back to the old sleep after last night. It would not. She understood that now. What had been a caged sleeping creature was now a caged waking creature, and the difference was going to take her years to learn, and she did not have years. She had 3 days. She let herself feel it as they rode, carefully. The way you test a new limb after a break. It was not the terrifying lunge of Voss's tower room, not the desperate pull of Adric's bedchamber. It was steady. It was waiting. It was almost... She hated the word. She did not want the word, but the word was there. It was almost companionable, the way a wolf at the edge of a firelight is companionable when you have fed it the bones and not the hand. She reached up. She laid her palm lightly against her own sternum, and the thing inside her, without her asking, pressed outward to meet her hand. Once, briefly. She closed her eyes for a second in the saddle. She opened them. She rode on. They pushed the horses hard. Halvard set the pace, a long, ground-eating trot, alternating with walks, occasional canters where the road allowed, and by dusk of the first day they had made ground that would have taken an ordinary column too. They did not stop at a village. Halvard would not let them. Voss has ridden this road a day ahead of us, he said, and a village is where a man hears news, and a man tells news. We camp cold. They camped cold. A hollow behind a ridge, no fire. The men ate bread and cold salt meat. Halvard threw a cloak over her and did not ask if she was warm enough. Cale walked the perimeter twice and came back and sat down on a stone across from her and did not speak for a while. Then he said, not looking at her, He's still alive, lady, if you were wondering. He was still alive when we rode out. Varn sent word to the gate. He was sitting up. He was angry. That's a good sign with the king. When he is angry, he is trying. When he goes quiet, Cale cleared his throat. That is when Varn worries. She looked at him across the dark. He looked back briefly. He was a hard-faced man, not much given to comfort, and he did not try to offer any. He offered the information, and he let her have it, and he looked back out at the snow. She was grateful to him for that. She was more grateful than she had words for, which was most of the ways she had ever been grateful for anything. Voss. On the second day, they caught sight of Voss's column. It was late afternoon. The snow had thinned. They were on a long ridge above a river valley, and down in the valley, on the road that ran along the frozen water, a dark line of horsemen was moving, unhurried, 2 abreast, 20 of them, with a rider at the head in a pale fur-trimmed cloak that Halvard said was Voss's. "He doesn't know we're coming," Halvard said, lying flat in the snow next to her with a hand over his horse's nose to keep it from calling out. "He's not scouting behind him. He thinks the road is his." "How long until Thornwick?" Kale said. "Tomorrow midday, if he rides the way he's riding. Tonight if he pushes. He won't push. He's already ridden the horses ugly." Kale chewed the inside of his cheek. He looked at Lyra. "Lady, we can take him. Right here. He's down in a bowl. We have the ridge, we have archers, we have 31 men against 20 tired ones. In an hour it's done." She watched the column in the valley. Voss was too far away to make out as a person, just a bright cloak on a dark horse. The idea of him rather than the man. But she could feel him. That was new. She had felt him in her tower. She had felt him across the hall. She had thought it was a thing that worked over rooms. Apparently with him, it worked over a mile. She did not know what to do with that information. She filed it. She thought. She thought about 31 men with arrows and swords, and 20 tired ones, and the noise of it, and the way noise in a valley in winter carried, and the scouts Voss would have out ahead even if he did not have any behind, and the riders at Thornwick who were expecting him, and what those riders would do if they heard that he had died on the road before he arrived. They would go to ground. They would scatter. They would vanish into Thornwick's household and become invisible again, and Thornwick's lady would never know who to hang. She shook her head. Kale did not argue. He had been told he would not argue, but his jaw worked. She pointed down the valley, past Voss, to where the road bent through a narrow cut between 2 low hills. She drew in the snow with her gloved finger. The cut. The hills on either side. She drew X's on the ridges above the cut. She tapped the X's. Halvard understood first. "Ambush him in the cut, not the valley," he said. "Close the back of the cut. Close the front. Take him where his 20 can't spread." She nodded. "And take him alive," Kale said, slowly, reading her face. She nodded again. Kale looked at her a long second. "Your king," he said, "told me we were not to take chances with him. Told me if we got a chance to end him in the open, we were to end him." She nodded. "Yes, he did." "You are overruling him." She nodded again. "Yes, I am. A beat. Reason, lady." She lifted her hand. She pressed her thumb against the pad of her index finger, and she twisted, as if turning a key. Then she mimed pouring something from a vial into a cup. Then she tapped her own chest. "He has more poison. He has more men. I want to know where." Kale let out a breath through his nose. "Halvard." "Aye. We take the cut. Alive. The lady is right." "Aye. All right." They took the cut at first light. It was not a clean thing. Nothing about it was clean. Halvard's men on the north ridge dropped 2 of Voss's outriders before the column knew to turn, and one of those outriders made a sound going down, a short, thin scream, and the column bolted forward instead of back, straight into the narrow end of the cut, where Kale's 18 were waiting with spears set. Voss's men broke on the spears. 3 of them went down in the first clash. 2 of Kyle's went down with them. Lyra saw one of them go, a young man named Purs, whose name she had only learned the night before, taken in the throat by a southern blade, and he was dead before his horse knew to stop. Voss himself turned his horse tight in the press and tried to go back the way he had come. The rear of the cut was closed by then, Halvard's men there, and Voss saw that, and did the thing a clever man does in a bad spot. He dropped his sword, he lifted both his hands, and he began to shout. He shouted her name. "Lyra! Lyra Dine! I know you're here! Don't let them kill me, Lyra! I know you're here! I can feel you!" It was the feel comment that did it. It snapped Halvard's head around, and Kale's and half the men's, because the men on her column did not, 2-1, understand yet what their lady was. They had been told she was important. They had been told she had saved the king. They had not been told what she could do, because nobody in the fortress yet had a word for it, least of all her. And now a man in a pale cloak, standing in his stirrups with his hands in the air, was shouting in the middle of a bloody cut that he could feel her, and 29 of the 31 men of her column suddenly turned and looked at her. She did not let them look long. She rode down into the cut. Not at a gallop. The ground was rough. There were bodies already. But at a steady pace, her ugly mare picking her footing, and she came up on Voss slowly across the last bloody yards of the cut, with Kale 1 pace behind her on her left, and Halvard 1 pace behind on her right, and she stopped 5 feet from his horse and looked at him. Voss was not smiling now. His face was the color his face had been in her tower when he had seen the blood on her lip, and for the same reason, and she understood suddenly that he had been right about one thing at least back in her tower. He had been right that he needed to make her, not take her, because now that he was within the thing's range without her cooperation, the thing in her chest had unfolded not a finger but a whole hand, and it was reaching for him, and he could feel it, and his cloak was shaking. "Lyra," he said. He tried for the easy tone. It did not work. "Lyra, you don't want this. Not here. Not like this. Whatever he's told you about me, I swear to you." She lifted a hand. He stopped. She turned her hand over, palm up, and she flexed her fingers very slightly. It was not a large motion. She did not even do it hard. But Voss went gray, and his horse sidestepped under him, and a thin line of blood came out of his left nostril and slid down to his upper lip, exactly where her own had slid 2 nights ago in her tower room. "Oh," he said softly. "Oh, you—" She closed her hand gently into a fist. He made a small strangled sound. Not a word. He did not fall off his horse. She did not let him. She opened her fist again before he went all the way gray, and his breath came back, and he sat there swaying in his saddle with blood on his lip and his eyes locked on hers, and something in them she had not seen in any man's eyes, ever. Not her father's, not her brother's, not Halleck's, not Adric's. A raw and personal fear. Not of death, of her. She pointed at him, then at the ground. He slid off his horse. Not gracefully. He half fell and caught himself on the saddle and went down on one knee in the trampled snow, and he stayed there. She looked at Kale. Kale moved, fast. 2 of his men were off their horses before she had fully turned her head, and Voss was being bound at the wrists with the careful, rough efficiency of men who had bound prisoners before, and had lost some of those prisoners on the road and were not going to lose this one. Halvard himself dismounted to search him. He found the little leather book in an inside pocket of the pale cloak. He found a small corked vial in the lining of the cloak. He found, stitched into the hem of the cloak, 3 separate slips of paper with 3 separate seals on them, none of them Voss's own. He brought the book and the vial and the papers to her. He held them up. She did not take them. She jerked her chin at Kale, his. Kale took them. "Lady," Halvard said. Not loud. "Thornwick. Voss was riding for Thornwick. There are men there waiting for him." She nodded. "If we ride hard—" Halvard hesitated. "If we ride hard, and we bring him in front of us, bound, in the sight of Thornwick's gates, and we call those men out." She looked at him, nodded again. "Aye, lady. Bosse." They reached Thornwick at the fall of the second night. The keep sat on a rise above a shallow ford, a grim square tower with a curtain wall of gray stone and a small town clustered below it. The gates were closed. Thornwick's lady had done what her husband had asked of her. She had closed the inner gate and she had admitted no one. And the town was quiet, the way a town is quiet, when the people in it know something is wrong but do not know yet how wrong. Lyra's column came out of the tree line with Voss at the head of it, mounted again, hands bound to the saddle horn, a lead rope held by Halvard. Torches had been lit along the column's line. The riders came on slowly. The lamp on Thornwick's gate tower came to life. A voice called out. "Thornwick's captain," Lyra guessed. "Who rides?" Halvard answered. Halvard of the North Marches, with 30 men of the king's household and a prisoner of the king, to speak with Lady Thornwick. "Name the prisoner." "Lord Cassian Voss, taken at the south cut this morning." A pause. A long one. On the gate tower, more shapes moved. And then, from somewhere down in the town, a man broke from a doorway and ran. He ran for the south gate of the town, which was closed, and when he found it closed, he ran for the east gate, which was closed, and he was halfway to the east gate when two of Halvard's outriders, who had gone around the town in the dusk, exactly in anticipation of this, ran him down and took him. A second man ran from a different doorway, then a third. Each was caught. Not one of them made it out of the town. By the time Lady Thornwick had opened her small inner gate and come out on foot with a lamp in her hand, a stout gray-haired woman with a knife at her belt and her mouth set in a line, 6 men had been pulled out of her town. Her own household captain, red-faced and speechless, stood beside her as each man was brought up and shown. "This one," the captain said, of the first, "stablemaster's son, came to us 2 years ago. This one of my own watch, came 5 years ago, recommended by—" He stopped. His jaw worked. "Recommended by my brother-in-law, who is not at this gate tonight, and who I believe is the 7th. Lady Thornwick turned her head. "Fetch Harvin." "Aye, lady." He was fetched, a tall, narrow man in a good wool coat, with a smile already pasted on his face as he came up through the crowd, and the smile went off him the moment he saw Voss on the horse at the front of Halvard's column. It went off him so completely and so fast that he did not even have time to arrange a second expression, and he was simply standing in the torchlight with no face at all when Lady Thornwick looked at him. "Harvin," she said. "Lady! Oh, Harvin, you stupid creature!" She did not strike him. She did not order anything done to him. She simply stepped back, and 2 of her men closed on him, and his hands went up in the old, helpless gesture of a man who has just understood that the thing he had thought was coming for him next week has, in fact, already come. They stayed 3 nights at Thornwick. Lady Thornwick put her private bedchamber at Lyra's disposal and slept with her women in the hall, and Lyra did not have the heart to refuse her, and spent the first night of it lying rigid in a bed larger than her father's entire idea of hospitality. She did not sleep until near dawn. When she slept hard. Master Varn's apprentice, the one with the steady hands, whose name was Piet, and who spoke only when spoken to, looked her over on the second day and muttered, and made her drink another cup of the bark and metal drink, and grunted at the results, and declared her fit to ride in another day if she did not use the thing in her chest again until they were back inside the walls of the Black Fortress. He had, she realized, been told about the thing in her chest. Master Varn had told him. Master Varn had not told anyone else. This was a small kindness she had not expected from a small old man, and she added it to a list she was beginning to keep. Voss was questioned. Not by her. She did not go into the room where he was kept, and she asked Cale not to bring her news of what he said. Cale obeyed. Cale questioned him himself, with Halvard, and by the end of the second day, Cale had a list. Names of men in other houses, names of ports, names of riders, and one name that made Cale go quiet for an hour before he wrote it down. "What is it?" Halvard asked. "A man in the king's own household, a kitchen man. One Master Varn flagged to me weeks ago. He was not Voss's alone. He was also—" Cale shook his head. "Never mind, I will tell the king." On the 3rd morning, they rode out for the Black Fortress, with Voss bound in a cart under 6 men's eyes, and Harvin bound beside him, and Lady Thornwick stood on the steps of her keep as they left, and lifted one hand to Lyra, and Lyra lifted one hand in return, and that was their farewell, and Lyra would remember it for the rest of her life. The stout gray-haired woman who had embarrassed no one by weeping for her almost betrayal, and had not embarrassed herself by pretending she had not nearly been betrayed, and had simply lifted a hand and was not sorry to see a silent girl in black ride away from her gate with a traitor in a cart. They made the Black Fortress at dusk of the 7th day from Lyra's departure. 4 days late on Adric's original count of 3, but Cale had sent riders ahead at every stage, and the riders had all reached the fortress, and the word in the gatehouse was that the king, when he had heard that his lady was at the Thornwick Cut and had taken Voss alive, had laughed, for the first time in anyone's memory in that fortress, and then lain back down and slept 2 full days, which was, Varn said crabbily to anyone who asked, the best medicine the king could have taken. He was in the great hall when she rode in. He should not have been. He should have been in bed. Varn had sworn he would keep him in bed, but he was in the hall.
propped against the arm of the old chair at the dais, not on the chair, not on the throne, on the arm of it, with a blanket around his shoulders like an old man, and his eyes were on the doors the moment they opened. And when she walked in, still in the black wool dress, which was muddy now along the hem, and her hair was half out of its braid, and there was a yellowing bruise down the side of her neck from a fall she had taken on the second day of riding back. When she walked in with Cale behind her and Halvard behind Cale, and 3 of her riders behind them with Voss on foot and chains, Adric stood up. He should not have stood up. He stood up. He crossed the hall. Not fast, not steady, but he crossed it. Master Varn started forward once and stopped himself because Master Varn had evidently been through this particular argument with the king at least twice that afternoon and had given it up. Adric came down the length of the hall in the blanket like a shawl over his shoulders, and his face was the face of a man who had been told many things over the last 7 days and had believed only one of them, which was her rider's word that she was still alive. He stopped in front of her. He did not touch her. He looked at her face and at the bruise on her neck and at her muddy hem and at her hair. "You came back," he said. Very quiet. She nodded. "You are," he said, with a strange, small, unsteady catch in his voice that she had never heard from him before. "You are a great deal muddier than I remember you being." She almost laughed. She reached up and she took the edge of his blanket, his ridiculous blanket, and she tugged it straighter on his shoulder, and she smoothed it with her palm. She was tired. She did not know she was going to do it until she had done it. It was a wife's gesture. It was not a gesture either of them had earned. She did it anyway, because she was too tired not to. His hand came up and closed around hers on his shoulder. Behind her, the great hall, which was full, Lyra understood only then, it was full. He had held the hall for her arrival, made a small, ragged sound. Not a cheer, not quite a cheer, a breath out. 40 men and women, in the middle of a long winter, letting out a breath they had been holding for 7 days. Adric turned his head, slowly, to face them. He kept her hand where it was, on his shoulder, under his. "Lords," he said. It was not loud. It did not have to be. The hall went quiet. "Lords, this is the woman who rode out of this fortress 7 days ago in my stead, with 31 of my men, against an enemy and a weather neither of which respected her, and who has returned to me with that enemy in chains, and with every one of my men who will ride again. She has done this, you will note, while not saying a single word, which means that she has done it, lords, by being a great deal more than any word I have for her." He paused. "I have been asked by some of you, quietly, in the last days, whether I intend to marry her. I will answer that question now in your hearing because I am tired of being asked it behind walls." He turned back to her. His hand, on her hand, tightened, once. "Lyra Dane," he said, "I am not going to ask you, in front of these men, to marry me. You cannot answer. It would be a cruelty and a performance, and neither of us has time for either. So I am going to ask you, in front of these men, something else. I am going to ask you to stay in this house, to stand at my right, as you stood at my right the morning Halleck fell, and to ride at my men's head, as you rode at their head to Thornwick, and to share with me every cold breakfast and every bad night, and every long count of dead bannermen that this frontier is going to hand us for as long as we both have hands to be counted on. And when you are ready, lady, not today, not tomorrow, when you are ready, you will decide whether what we have becomes a marriage, or whether it stays the shape it is. Either shape I will keep, only stay." He took a breath. It was a bad breath. His color was worse than it had been when she rode in. Varn was making a face in the corner. "Answer me," he said, "how you can." She looked at him. She took her hand out from under his. He let it go. She turned. She faced the hall. 40 men, 40 women. There were some, along the back, she saw them now, Oda in the middle of them, with her arms crossed and a suspicious shine on her face. She took one long breath of her own. Then slowly, deliberately, she walked around behind Adric Vale, and she stepped up, under his arm, and she set her shoulder under his armpit. She was not tall enough to be a proper crutch, but she was enough. She could take some of it. And she took his hand that had been on her hand, and she laid it across the front of her shoulder, and she held it there with her own hand, the way a person holds a cloak in place in wind. And she stood. She stood holding him up in the middle of his own hall,
in front of his own men, and she did not move her eyes to him, and she did not lower her face, and she let the entire hall look at the picture of it, at the Alpha King of the frontier, leaning on the mute daughter of a house that had thrown her away, and the mute daughter holding him as if she had been built for it. And she let them make of it whatever they were going to make of it. The silence in the hall went from uncertain to something else. Something Lyra did not have a name for. She did not need one. The shape of it was enough. Then Halvard, old, gray, scarred, the man who had gone on one knee for her in an empty hall, said, in a voice that carried, "My queen." He said it quietly. He did not shout. He did not make a performance of it. He said it the way a man says his wife's name at her grave or his king's name on a battlefield, as a fact, not a hope. And somebody else said it, a younger voice. Kale, she thought. And then another, Halvard's men. And then ragged, uneven, not organized, not practiced, not the rehearsed acclamation of a coronation, but something much more honest than that. The hall took it up. My queen. My queen. My queen. It went around the walls. It went up into the rafters. It went out the open doors and into the courtyard, where the grooms and the stable boys and the smiths heard it and picked it up without understanding yet what they were saying, because something in that hall had decided, and decisions in the Black Fortress had always traveled faster than words. Adric's hand tightened on her shoulder. Oda was crying openly and not trying to hide it. Lyra held him up. She did not weep. She did not smile particularly. She kept her shoulder under his weight and her eyes on the far doors, and she let the hall name her. She let a room full of men who had, a week earlier, looked past her. Most of them, some of them openly laughed, one of them thrown a piece of gristle onto her plate, call her a thing she had never, in 19 years, imagined being called. A thing her own father, sitting in his stone hall 4 days' ride away, was about to hear called out of her by riders and messengers and merchants, all carrying the same story, whether he wanted to hear it or not. She thought very briefly of her father. She thought of her mother. She thought of Morel, who had cried so prettily when the summons had come, and who was probably, at this hour, being measured for another dress. She did not feel triumph at the thought. She did not feel grief either. She felt, and this surprised her, she had not expected it, she felt sorry for them. Sorry for people who had looked at her for 19 years and had not been able to see. Sorry for people who had used the word flaw as if they had known what the word meant. Sorry mostly for the small, ordinary human failure of eyes that do not bother to learn how to look. She understood, standing there in the cold hall with the king's weight on her shoulder and the word queen still moving around the rafters, that there had never been anything wrong with her silence. That her silence had been her cage, yes, but that her silence had also been her saving, because the thing inside her had needed someone to hold it, and hold it carefully, and listen to it, and understand it before letting it out. And the loud girls, the Merrills of the world, the daughters who could scream and wheedle and charm, they would never have held it. They would have used it for the first small thing they wanted, and it would have used them right back. And there would have been nothing of them left by the time they were 19. Silence had made her ready. And love, the small, ordinary, rough, unpretty thing that was the king's palm on the back of her hand in a solar, the old physician's cup of bitter bark water, Oda's shawl, Halvard's knee on a cold floor, Kale's, I have a rope. Love, she understood now, was not the opposite of silence. Love was what happened inside silence when someone else was finally willing to sit in it with you. Adric's breath was shallow at her ear. His color was very bad now. Master Varn was already moving through the crowd with a face like thunder. She turned her head. She did not look at the hall anymore. She looked up at the king on her shoulder. She lifted her free hand and laid it, lightly, against his jaw, and she moved his face a quarter inch so that he was looking at her too. His eyes found hers, silver, tired, entirely there. She smiled. It was a small smile. It was not a queen's smile, not yet. It was Lyra Dane's smile, the one she had been saving since she was 7 years old, the one no one had ever been judged worthy of. And she gave it to him in a hall full of men calling her a title she had not asked for. And he, the butcher of the brews, the man who had not smiled in a decade, he smiled back. Slow, lopsided, entirely unpracticed. It was the ugliest, most human, most beautiful smile she had ever seen. Varn, Adric said, without taking his eyes off her. Take me back upstairs before I fall over in front of my queen and ruin the moment. My lord, Varn muttered, already at his elbow, you had one instruction. I know, Varn. One. I know, Varn. They took him upstairs between them, Varn on one side and Kale on the other, and Lyra walked behind with her hand still on the back of his blanket, and the hall did not disperse. The hall stayed, and talked, and drank, and called her name in a dozen different tones for the rest of the night. The Black Fortress, which had been a place where women were sent to die, became that night a place where a woman had been made, and by morning every rider out of its gates carried the story. And within a week the story was in every house on the frontier, and within a month it was in the mouths of children in villages whose names Lyra would never learn. The frontier did not love her. The frontier did not need to. The frontier feared her, and obeyed her, and listened to her. Listened to a queen whose silence had become, at last, a sound they understood. And in a narrow bed 2 floors above the hall, with the fire banked low, and Master Varn snoring in the next room, and one of Kael's men standing a silent watch at the door, Adric Vale slept with Lyra's hand in his own, and Lyra sat awake beside him for a long time, watching the small, steady movement of his chest, and understood, for the first time, what it was to have chosen a room and a man and a life and to be staying in it. She closed her eyes only when the first gray of dawn came up past the window. She did not dream. She had no need to.